Welcome, everyone. It is a pleasure to have you all here with us today, wherever you're joining from. I do hope that you are well. I'm Sharon Chung, for those of you who haven't met me before. I'm Copa's Director of National Programming, and over the coming months, you'll see more and more of the plans that we have to improve the experience that you have as members. And if you're not a member, perhaps you'll be curious enough to become a future member. We are curious where you're coming from. I'm coming from Ottawa. You'll see there's a few other speakers here today. We'd love to know where you're joining from. So shortly after I'm done speaking, I'll launch a poll and you can tell us where you're following along from. Now, the Copa Safety Program, it does include free online seminars, and today's seminar itself is proudly sponsored by Tanis Aircraft Products, who's here with us today, SiriusXM, as well as Pull Employee Benefits. And shortly after, my colleague Christine Gervais, who you all know is our president and CEO, provides an introduction. We'll have Doug Evink from the Tanis Aircraft Products Group, who is the president and CEO, provide a little bit of a summary of some of the work that they do. We're all still in the thick of winter, so it is good timing to hear about their preheating products. Lastly, I do wish to thank you for being here with us over the weekend, spending some time with us, and doing so to improve yourself as a pilot. Today's seminar, it's on pilot decision making and on spring flying. It is loaded with great content and considerations for you as you continue along on your pilot journey. So welcome and thank you. I now invite Christine to start. Let's open your slides. Here we go.
Hey, good morning or good afternoon or whatever time it is in your part of the country. As Sharon said, I'll reiterate, thank you for sharing your Saturday, at least a few hours with us to join us for our safety seminar. This is the second one, part of the safety program. We'll be hosting a monthly seminar, so thank you so much. Lots of people on right now, as I can see. There's like 455 and the number keeps going up, so that's great. So the first thing I'll start by talking about is, I think Sharon went through it a little bit, is our agenda. So I'll be talking about the current and upcoming programs that we are developing. And then, of course, Doug Evink from Tanis Aircraft Products will do a small presentation. He's our sponsor for today. And then we'll move on to Peter, who will present the first part with a break before we head to the second part. And then, of course, we'll have a question and answer period. We'll try to get to as many questions as we can during the seminar. Try to keep your questions relevant to the topic that we're talking about today. If you have any other questions that are not necessarily relevant to the topic today, please do send us an email at copa@copanational.org, and we'll be happy to answer any of those questions. So for those of you who aren't Copa members, a little bit about Copa. Sorry, I wanted to mention too that the seminar is going to be delivered in English. However, the slides will be bilingual, and so the slides will be available on our website for Copa members if you want to follow along with the French slides. So the Canadian Owners and Pilots Association represents all of general aviation. And we're working really hard to advance, to promote, and to preserve all of our Canadian freedom to fly. We've been in existence since 1952, and we've always been at the forefront of raising public awareness and increasing the understanding of the sometimes very complex issues that are facing general aviation in Canada. A little time out here to meet the team that makes all of these wonderful programs run efficiently. Of course, I've introduced myself already. You've all met Sharon Chung, who is the Director of National Programming. We have Peter Campbell, who is our Director of External Relations. He just sent a wave there. He'll be delivering this seminar for you today. We have Tanya Storing, who is our Manager of Finance and Member Benefits, always looking for great benefits for our membership. And she's been with Copa now for 20 years. And of course, the friendly voice behind the phone when you call Copa is Angela Storing, who's our administrative and membership coordinator. So a little bit about the safety program, why we decided to develop the safety program is to decrease the number of GA incidents and accidents. So trying to do our part for that. We want to improve and we want to promote aviation safety through this proactive awareness program. And we encourage collaboration with Copa members, with our Copa flights, and as well as with external stakeholders such as NAV Canada, Transport Canada, the TSB, and the FAA on safety strategies. And basically, it's to try and promote compliance with the regulations. We're going to be offering free monthly seminars. 4 of them this year are going to be approved by Transport Canada, so they will count towards your pilot recurrent training program. Members who participate in these seminars, each seminar qualifies you for entry into our annual prize. We'll be divulging what that prize is in the coming months. And of course, we will have safety related articles in our Copa Flight magazine for our members. So our last seminar was in January, and we had 1,300 people register. We had over 700 people attend. We sent everyone a short survey to fill out because your feedback is incredibly important so that we can continue to better these seminars as we move forward. We had some wonderful feedback. As you can read here, points to note was the format as it relates to length. Between the 2 and 3 hours seemed to be what people wanted. So we'll definitely try to keep it within the 2 and 3 hour window. And as far as the timing, the time of day, 11:30, between 11:30 and 12:30 seems to be a good time for our folks out in the West Coast and our folks out in the East Coast. So we do have to accommodate several time zones. So we will try to keep it on a Saturday during these times so that as many people across the country can participate in these seminars. We are also accepting applications now for the Copa Neil J. Armstrong Scholarship. I encourage any of you who are on the seminar today that are between the ages of 15 or 21, or any of you that know somebody between the ages of 15 and 21 who would like to start flight training, but might not necessarily have the money in order to do that. We do have an ab initio scholarship, which provides $10,000 towards your PPL. So that's a pretty good chunk of your PPL right there. And we also have an advanced training scholarship worth $5,000 for anyone who wants to move forward with their training once they've done their PPL. So I invite everyone to go to our website under scholarships, and we're accepting applications until March 31st of 2021, and we'll announce the winner at our annual general meeting at the end of June. All right, so we're also offering a 10% Copa store discount to everyone who is in the seminar today. Remember, it stands for Pilot Decision Making 2021. That's the year that we're in. It will expire on the 22nd at the end. So try to get your orders in for your 10% discount. We are also doing a $50 coupon giveaway to the Copa store for the first member who signed up for the seminar. He was actually the first person to sign up for the seminar as well. So Gary Appelt, congratulations. You are today of a $50 coupon. We'll be sending that to your email address.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Christine. I'm not sure. I think she might have had to have hopped off due to some internet issues, so I can carry along. So congratulations, Gary. That's fantastic. I hope you all can see me, by the way. I can still see myself there. 10% Copa store discount. You'll see that on the side there is an offer, and you can click directly on our website. So you can go from there. There's the discount code PDM 2021, as Christine had mentioned, and you have a couple days to use that as well. So I'm going to go ahead and continue along with these slides here. And to close it off with these programs, they cannot fully exist to the professionalism that they do without our sponsors who directly support the programming itself. These seminars are free, and the way that I would think about it is, in exchange for that free content, is to share as much as you can with your peers, as well as to help improve safety overall with general aviation, as well as to support the sponsors that we have here today. Christine, I see that you're back. Would you like to join back in?
Sure. I got kicked out of the room there, so sorry about that. So I'll just reiterate a big thank you to our sponsors. They're the reasons why we can continue to offer these seminars without any charge to our members and to the general public at large. So a big thank you to Tess for being our sponsor today, who will be doing a short presentation, and to Pull Employee Benefits. In case you didn't know, we do offer health and dental benefits through the association. And you can at Aviation. For those of you who don't know, if you subscribe to a 1-year Sirius XM subscription, you get Copa membership for free. So that's pretty much all I had. If you have any questions at all, as they relate to the seminar, definitely write your questions and we'll try to answer them at the end as much as we can. If we can't, we will have a question and answer sheet along with the video of the seminar, and we will be posting it on our members only section of the website. Any other questions, feel free to send them all to copa@copanational.org, and they will be directed to the appropriate people. So without further ado, Sharon, if you want to say a couple more words, otherwise a few words from Doug Evink, our sponsor.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Christine. Lots of good information there overall. For those of you who were at our last seminar, you'll notice we did switch tools. So we went from Zoom meeting tool to now a webinar tool. So there's some key functions and that you'll see that's a little different. There is a chat function. So those questions that we had asked you to direct to us, you can use the chat function there and we'll respond to you directly. And again, you can email us at copa@copanational.org. I will leave it there, and I am safely warm in my home. So I think I'm now open to hearing about some winter products overall. So I will kick it over and welcome Doug. Thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks, Sharon. And I think I may have kicked off the polar vortex, because when I did start talking to Sharon about making this presentation, we literally lost all kinds of temperature, and this last couple of weeks and a half have been very interesting in our part of the world. So I really appreciate the opportunity to not only be sponsored, but just to give you a brief, really a snapshot of what we do for various seminars in the marketplace. And of course, what a world in 2020. We went from doing these all in person to now doing them via Zoom. So basics of aviation preheating. I'm going to just take about 8 minutes and breeze through what we have determined is really something to be thinking about when it comes to the aviation preheating side. So first of all, if you look at the left-hand side there, that's a brand new Cirrus aircraft landing on a lake. We do that the first weekend in March because in Minnesota, you have to have your ice house, your ice fishing house off the lake on the last weekend of February. So everybody's plowing a great big road to take their ice houses off the lake. And we just thought, hey, let's start an annual tradition of landing a bunch of planes there for that proverbial $100 hamburger or lunch. That was one of Cirrus Aircraft's salespeople. And then on the right-hand side, we also do a lot of work in the rotor wing world. That's out in the Canadian Rockies where Erickson Aircrane was using that product to install a high voltage power line. We basically have two locations. We're a Minnesota-based company. Our sales, engineering, and R&D is done in Blaine, Minnesota, which is a northern suburb of the Minneapolis-St. Paul area, right by one of the reliever airports called Anoka County Airport. And the manufacturing of our product is all done at the Glenwood. It's a west central Minnesota town airport. The founder, Pete Tanis, who started the company, was really instrumental in starting the actual airport, and not only the airport, but also being able to produce our product there, do flight school training, started doing maintenance work. He has since passed away, and I've had a couple of owners between him and I, but I've had the opportunity now to purchase the company back in 2012 and really take it to what I believe is the next level of product. So jumping into, I thought I'd just give you, what do we look at when we see a brand new airframe or an engine, such as we have a couple engines in our hangar right now that we're designing.
Doug, I'm sorry to cut you off. We're getting a few comments on volume. I do suspect it's the actual participants' computer settings, but if you don't mind just increasing your volume. Thank you.
Thanks, Sharon. I have put it up to maximum, so I'm at as far as I can go. If the participants can dial it up, and then of course they'll be blasted out when they hear the next speaker. I apologize for that. So goals of preheating. Basically, we look at two specific goals. We want to get, it's a multi-point preheat system that we design, and we want everything that's above the oil line to be warmer than the oil. So we want to produce, without an insulated engine cover, we want to produce a cylinder head temperature at least 50 degrees above the ambient temperature. You'll hear us talk about that above ambient, because that's how we design it. And of course, everything I'm talking about is going to be in Fahrenheit. And we want to produce an oil temperature at least 40 degrees above that ambient temperature. But a critical part that we have determined is we don't want to ever see the oil getting above 120 degrees from the preheating process, and we never want the oil to be warmer than the cylinder, because of water that's beneath your oil can then evaporate and condense on parts of your engine that are not warmer than the oil. And we're going to jump through a couple items of that. And I always caution people, here comes the physics. Here's the engineer that, loves talking about physics, and only the engineers like hearing it. Water evaporates at any temperature. Even this past week when we were pushing minus 20, minus 30, and water will still evaporate from a solid to a vapor. The rate of that evaporation process is the difference between the temperature of the water, or in the case of your aircraft engine, the temperature of your oil, and the ambient dew point, which ambient dew point is the dew point inside of your crankcase. Usually the same as your hangar, but sometimes not once you start changing the heating system. So the greater that delta, more of it evaporates. It can condense if anything's below the dew point. And I get people to think about that. If you think of a washcloth left out in your house in the summertime, it'll stay wet for a long period of time, hours, sometimes even a half a day. But in the wintertime, for those of us that live in cold climates with forced air heat, our dew points and our humidity drop so much that washcloth dries so quickly. And that's because there's a huge difference between the dew point temperature and the temperature of the liquid of that cloth. So what do we do to help you understand that? Because obviously not everyone has Tannis preheat. There's different types of companies out there. So we say, hey, we're gonna prove some results via tests that we're doing all the time, but you can also do, even if you don't have an engine monitor. I'm gonna go through a couple graphs here really quickly and kind of show you what we do to make sure we're achieving the results we want to see. And here's the first graph, very popular aircraft, Cessna 172. We start at the way left side of the graph. When we plug it in, you'll see those top four lines. That's our cylinder head temperature sensor. We put a thermocouple right by the CHT well, or on the opposite side of where we're heating that aircraft. And you'll notice that they're 50 to 60 degrees above ambient. The bottom line is the ambient temperature. And the other line in the middle is your oil. And we were also doing an R&D on our cabin heater at that time. So that's the pink line. But you notice I want to have at least a 10 to 20 degree difference between the oil and that cylinder head, or anything that's above the oil temperature. And that's key. And you also notice our product rides the temperature curve. We started at 15 degrees F, it dropped down to 10, and you'll see it how it rides that curve. And probably more importantly, you'll see that within that first hour and a half, you got all the way up to temperature. Now this is in the unheated hangar. If you need more than that 50 to 60 degrees above ambient, that's when you need to introduce a cowl plug or an insulated engine cover or your favorite blanket, etc. You'll notice here's our 177. So the Cardinal, you'll see same 1.5 to 2 hour rise from plugging it in. This is without the cover. We install the cover the next morning, and now you're going to get another 60 degrees, 50 to 60 degrees of temperature on both the cylinders and the oil. But you see it takes much longer. So that means you're going to need to be plugging it in overnight and leaving the cowl plugs in, or have an insulated engine cover if you need that 80, 100, 110 degree temperature rise over ambient. And we get tons of questions about, well, I just went to the hardware store, the auto store, and I bought a sump only or an oil pan heater, and I plug it in here, and eventually everything's going to get to be the exact same temperature. And here's where we end up really having an issue with some things that happen, because you notice this is the oil temperature right here. Here is the temperature of our cylinders and the things above the oil. I don't have a dew point temperature, but your dew point is probably someplace right in here. And unfortunately, that sets up a process where condensation, moisture could condense on your rocker cover, your valve, your cam. And that's something we don't want to see happen. And thus we have that type of concern. And we then took that aircraft engine, put our system on it, and you see the difference again. Now here's our cylinders, here's the oil, and we want to see that difference between oil temperature and cylinder temperature. How do we, let me clear this off so you can see it and drop back away from there. What is our product? So you're going to see we have threaded elements that go into the cylinders. So what that is right in this area. You'll see we put it into the intake tube of the Cirrus right at the factory, or on this Carbon Cub. We're just placing our threaded element right into that intake tube, or it can go into any one of your rocker cover locations that we have shown right here. This is at the factory at Cirrus. When you buy the aircraft, you'll see it's already installed in a split rocker cover. That's our threaded elements. And then we have pad elements, one on a 6-cylinder, one's going to go on top of the case, and one's going to go on the bottom of the oil sump to give you that temperature. On a 4-cylinder, we don't need the one on top of the case because we're getting enough heat right directly from the cylinders. We do have elements that can be threaded into a sump versus the silicone element that goes on there. But our common system is the silicone pad because that fits everything. We do also get questions. There is one other multi-point preheat company out that uses a band, a hose clamp, a thin silicone element around the base of the cylinder. And this will show you the difference between doing a heating from inside the cylinder with a 50-watt element versus the base of the cylinder here with a 100-watt element. We're 50 to 60 degrees warmer, and making sure that you do not have any concern of your cylinders being colder than the dew point. So that's just a great little quick snapshot of what we do in the piston marketplace. We do have things in the rotor wing. We have cabin heaters, avionic heaters, ABU heaters. We do heat batteries, and we heat a lot of things outside of the aviation industry. But just wanted to take a quick couple moments to give you a snapshot of us. And again, thanks Sharon and everyone at Copa for giving us the opportunity to make a presentation, and also for us to be able to sponsor these programs. We think it's such a great way, especially in light of us never having not having a trade show at all in 2020. This is the new normal.
That's fantastic. Thanks so much, Doug. You're right. And the beauty of it is being able to have more people in the room to learn about these fantastic products and the fantastic work that you and your team do. So thanks so much for your time. If there's any questions, you do see the contact information here to send over to Doug and his team. Feel free to also add it into the chat function. We can funnel over those questions, any preheating questions you may have, over to Tana's aircraft products. From here, I now welcome Peter to join us for the main content of the day. So I'll go ahead and start the slides for you, and you can go ahead and click through them, Peter.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Peter Campbell. As Christine said a few moments ago, I'm the Director of External Relations. I come to Copa with a bit of experience. I've been flying since before I could legally drive a car, back when the Earth was flat and dinosaurs roamed Ontario. I've been flying for 50 years. I was a military pilot for over 30. Last 11 years, I was a flight instructor that also became the CFI and general manager at the Auto Flying Club for about 2.5 years. And safety and discussions like this have been part of my life for a long time, and I'm really energized by being here with you today. So without any further ado, let's jump into it and let's talk about pilot decision making. So this one really inspires a lot of people, probably almost the most popular hangar flying topic of what is pilot decision making and what's it all about. We know that whenever we hear the term pilot error as a cause of an accident, we can usually substitute the term poor pilot decision making and thus more accurately describe the cause of the event. Accidents, however, are rarely the result of a single circumstance or a single bad decision. You might have heard of the Swiss cheese model, where basically a bunch of things come together in a chain of events that create a bad situation. And improving the pilot decision would probably break that chain somewhere along the line. So today we're going to take a look at some of these steps. Whenever we talk about a pilot who's been killed in a flying accident, we could all think of one thing in mind. He called upon the sum of all his knowledge and made a judgment. He believed it so strongly that he knowingly bet his life on it. That his judgment was faulty was a tragedy, not stupidity. Every inspector, supervisor, and contemporary who spoke to him had an opportunity to influence judgment. So a little of all of us goes with every pilot that we lose. What we're going to do today is a 6-part program for the first part here of part 1. And in part 1, we're going to break it down, as I said, into 6 parts. Introduction, which we're doing right now. We're going to talk about being embarrassed to death and pilot attitudes. The type of accidents that afflict us and making some smart choices. Introducing Blaise Pascal and some case studies after that, featuring a couple of typical pilots. And then we're going to conclude with setting personal minimums. So the old joke says, how can you tell there's a pilot at your cocktail party? Give it 10 minutes and he or she will tell you. The way we look at ourselves is often, as you can see in this slide here, many pilots are of the type A variety. We see ourselves as confident, skillful, young, and rare masters of a difficult set of skills. If you have a pilot license in your bag, you're a rare, skillful creature to be admired by all for the rare and special distinction of having mastered the air. Not surprisingly, as pilots, we are the center of attention, especially at parties where we announce our status. What we do is considered special, perhaps even daring, despite the fact that we know deep in our hearts that flying is not the dangerous or risky pastime the public perceives it to be. The reality is that we are just human beings who put on our flight suits one leg at a time. And as a result of our training, we may calculate our risks better than most, but we are still human, prone to all the factors that make all humans fallible. According to Transport Canada in 2016, there were 147 accidents involving private Canadian registered aircraft. And of that 147 accidents that occurred, 24 were fatal. Today, we're going to take a look at one of those, one of the most important factors behind those decisions. So let's get started. As a kid, many of us would have rather died than speak in public, and that was because we had no experience with dying. But as we have been embarrassed in front of a group, we may have been embarrassed in front of a group, and that was a pretty traumatic experience. One of our greatest weaknesses as individuals is the possibility of being embarrassed by our mistakes. That's only human. We make hundreds of decisions related to every flight, every day, every time we fly. And none of us wants to be the butt of hanger-flying gossip. So here we can see that one of the principal drivers of pilot errors in general aviation is the pilot's determination not to be seen as being unable to handle tough situations. Embarrassment is an overarching factor that is often hidden by stated or believed other issues. A study by Copa a few years ago sought to determine which columns and articles appealed to readers the most. Unsurprisingly, perhaps, the study found that the two most popular features were incidents and accidents and enforcement. The vast majority of us flip open the magazine and go straight to the accidents page. Why do we do that? There can be a lot of reasons. Do any of these look familiar? Learn from mistakes, morbid curiosity, self-affirmation. I would never do that. And then next, we check out enforcements when we get to see the punishment suffered by others. There can be a lot of reasons we are drawn to this page. Do any of these look familiar? Education experience, a bit of gloating over the misfortune of others, seeing what bullets you dodged when you didn't get caught. So what we're talking about today is the decision-making process. We can use a little acronym down the side there, DECIDE, which really stands for, in this model, we first detect a change or deviation from our planned action. Then we estimate the correction required. We choose a desirable outcome. We initiate a change by doing something. And then we evaluate the effect of this action or correcting the deviation. I just want to point out that this is not a linear and start situation. This is a continuous loop. In the military, we had what's called the OODA loop, which is basically the same thing. So in our pilot situational awareness, throughout this process, the pilot is called upon to evaluate 5 important elements about himself: the aircraft, the environment, the type of operation or flight, such as sightseeing, training, charters, etc., and the situation of the other 4 elements. In normal circumstances, our decision-making process operates effectively, but when stressors are present, the decision-making process can become strained or fail altogether as the pilot fails to properly evaluate any of the 5 flight elements. Stressors can be broadly organized or categorized as either physical, physiological, or psychological. Let's look at some of these. So physical stressors relate to our environment and include such factors as cockpit temperature, noise, vibration, and turbulence, hypoxia, or the level of oxygen in our blood, and carbon monoxide and the level of that in our blood. Any of these stressors can alter our perceptions tremendously to the point that we are no longer able to make realistic evaluations. An environment contaminated with loud noise and low-frequency vibrations is fatiguing as well as stressful. Guess what? Most aircraft cockpits do not provide the most relaxing environment. Most aircraft cockpits have problems with cockpit temperature, noise, vibration, turbulence, issues with hypoxia potentially, and certainly in some smaller aircraft, carbon monoxide as well. Moving on to the physiological stressors, those are the ones that affect the functions of our bodies and our minds. They include such common factors as fatigue and proper nutrition. And I'm sure you've all heard of and used, I hope, the I'm Safe checklist, which talks about illness, medication, stress, alcohol, fatigue, and eating, i.e. proper nutrition. And that's how we really talk about that I'm safe, and we'll be talking about that more later. Last but not least, the third factor is the psychological stressors, and these include a myriad of factors such as peer pressure, self-image, that nasty one, get-home-itis, and the hurry-up syndrome. There's a good article about 20 years ago in the Copa flight training magazine that talked a lot about this. These stressors can severely alter our perception of the 5 elements of flight decision-making. On top of that, both the FAA and Canada have identified what we call 5 hazardous attitudes. They literally define attitudes that can make or undermine a pilot's aeronautical decision-making. These attitudes, these hazardous attitudes are, as on the slide here, anti-authority, impulsivity, invulnerability, macho, and resignation. Now, they all seem to have negative connotations. Each really represents a trait or a characteristic embodied in the psyche of every human mind. The key to maintaining a safe attitude is understanding the factors that influence each of these traits and recognizing the situation when these traits may become prevalent enough to be compromised our decision-making ability. All right, let's move on to anti-authority. So while most of us don't like to admit it, at times we all act as if the rules don't apply to us. Example in cars: speeding, rolling stops, amber lights. I won't go on about this. We've all done it, and if you haven't, well, okay, maybe you're the rare pilot in the room. We also rationalize errors in judgment. Their car came out of nowhere is a classic statement like that. In the air, we find ourselves doing things that is not a good way of doing things at all. Abbreviating a traffic pattern, using non-standard entries, skipping checklists, flying a little closer to the clouds than you really should be, and in poor weather conditions that are legally allowed. And unfortunately, what we tend to do is rationalize these actions, saying things like, I've done this 100 times before. And that's not, there was nobody else in the pattern. I know the checklist by heart, and things like that. These stressors, psychological stressors, are probably the most common cause allowing anti-authority traits to run amok. When we feel a strong need to get somewhere, we can feel justified in bending the rules. And when our anti-authority attitude overwhelms our good judgment, we are squarely in the danger zone. Impulsivity. Throughout our training, the need to react quickly, to take prompt action in response to a changing situation is important. It's emphasized. When we hear the stall warning, we lower the nose, apply power, and level the wings. We act quickly because we have to. On landings, we make rapid corrections to compensate for the effects of gusty winds. When an engine fails or a fire breaks out, we respond immediately with carefully programmed actions. A person with hazardous impulsivity attitude may feel the need to do anything quickly. That good old expression, watch me do this, or hold my beer while I try this. But there are times when reacting too quickly can get us into trouble. Rushing through a checklist, you miss an item, hurrying to feather a failed engine, and you might inadvertently feather the wrong one, dead foot, dead throttle. There are very few times when lightning quick responses are essential to safety and survival. And in most situations, including many emergencies, it's better to take time to sort things out before committing to a course of action. One of my instructors a long time ago said, Peter, take a deep breath before you move the lever. When you're invulnerable, we all have a built-in sense of invulnerability. It's a survival mechanism and allows us to cope with the prospect of injury or death. If we truly believe that we would be injured or killed each time we climbed into the cockpit, we'd probably never turn the starter. Of course, we don't think we're going to crash. We tend to believe that accidents happen to other pilots. Can't happen to me. Virtually all the factors that affect safety are under our direct control. We know that as long as we make good decisions, we should never have an accident. However, this feeling of invulnerability should always be tempered by an equally strong sense of caution. We got to keep it in balance. Otherwise, this important survival mechanism becomes a serious safety and liability, and we may fail to stop and consider the very risks that are involved in the actions we take. Macho. Pilots must have a high degree of confidence in their ability to operate an airplane. Of course they do. Aviation is full of challenges. Flight planning, decision-making, computing, and navigating. Our training is designed to foster our self-image as competent, capable pilots. As aviation pioneer Burrell Markham said, success breeds confidence. Each time we succeed in our flight, we have more confidence that we can do it again, as long as it's well-based. Sometimes our confidence outstrips our ability to safely fly the airplane. Especially when we have a strong desire to accomplish a goal, we can fool ourselves into believing that we can do something that is actually stretching the limits of our ability. We'll talk about setting limits a little later on today. At the extreme end of the spectrum, people with a hazardous, macho attitude will feel a need to continually prove that they are better than everybody else. They're better pilots than anyone else in the room, on the flight line, wherever, and will take foolish chances to demonstrate their superior ability. Individuals who normally keep their macho attitude in check can be tripped up when certain psychological factors color their perception. Stresses can lead to the hurry-up syndrome or get-homeitis that causes pilots to overestimate their abilities to handle the situation. Physiological stressors can also influence our macho attitude. We all know that alcohol and drugs affect our decision-making abilities. But even the air we breathe can affect our perceptions. Flying high without supplemental oxygen can lead to hypoxia. We can also get hypoxia for many other reasons, just other than just flying high. Could be drug-related, G-related, just two other reasons. And in this hypoxic state, a pilot may feel secure and justified in taking unnecessary risks. Now, we know everybody has a limit, and at some point, each of us will recognize that we have reached it and resign ourselves to the consequence saying, oh, that's it. There's nothing more I can do, or I can't do that. This resignation becomes hazardous when a pilot gives up when faced with difficult situations. Those with a hazardous resignation attitude believe they have little control over their own destiny, that fate or bad luck is the cause of their misfortune. Not good. Our perception of our limits can change from year to year or even minute to minute as our environment changes and physiological, psychological, and physical factors all come into play. Physical and physiological stressors probably have the greatest influence on our perceived limits. When we're tired or feeling sick, we may become overwhelmed. I recall how, on a solo cross-country flight, my own abilities were impaired by a pretty significant bout of air sickness. I had one goal. I got to get that airplane on the ground now, and I want to get out before I make a mess of everything. I gave up my checklist, I flew the pattern the wrong way, and guess what? I landed on the wrong runway. An hour later, after everything was subsided, sick tummy was gone, I realized how severely my piloting abilities had been compromised. I got lucky, but wow, what a day. So once we recognize that our decision-making might be compromised by a hazardous attitude, we can apply a corrective mechanism for our own use. When the anti-authority attitude strikes, we need to remind ourselves that the rules are usually right, so we should follow. The regulations we fly by have literally been written in the blood of others, and they exist for our protection. So why not follow them? When we find ourselves tempted to react impulsively, we can remind ourselves to think first. Slow down, take a deep breath, and don't rush. When we find ourselves thinking that bad things only happen to other pilots in vulnerability, we need to think again. Take mental notes of all the factors influencing the safety of the flight. If we put these factors into the context of an accident or reporting our own, we can make ourselves better, more objective in our evaluations of our situation. The same goes for the macho attitude. If we find ourselves about to take a chance, we need to reflect on how significant these decisions are. Ask yourself, how important is this flight? How important will it be in 5 days or 5 years from now? Chances are it won't be that important. Finally, we need to watch out for those times when our abilities become compromised by tunnel vision. When the resignation attitude develops, we must realize that we are not helpless, and we must force ourselves to continue thinking and flying the plane. Don't give up. I'm not helpless. Remember, in the end, we're only human. We are only human. In our innate curiosity that drives us to explore the misfortunes of our fellow pilots and to learn what we can from those events. But very human characteristics are often at the core of those events, and that's what we will be exploring today. Now, we all know who this gentleman is. He earned the title hero and became the poster boy for a competent and secure pilot. But he and his wife never lost their perspective. As it says on the slide, well, the world may think he's a hero, but he still snores. Amen, Mr. Sullivan. Amen. What a guy. On the whole, aviation safety has been improving. Within the general aviation community, the number of hours flown per accident, which is how accidents are reported, has been decreasing steadily, slowly, but accidents still happen. Let's take a look. What causes and why we have accidents. So this chart summarizes the data gathered by Transport Safety Board of Canada and represents the complete national data set. Although the chart represents data collected over several years, the annual trends look very, very similar, almost identical. Provincial standards or data also shows a similar trend. An interesting note is that an analytical summary of aircraft accidents includes a lot of reasons for the accident, but poor decision-making doesn't show up as a category of accident cause. Interestingly enough, accidents during the landing phase make up the major portion of all accidents, as you can see here, very significantly more than anywhere else, and slightly more than 50% of all aviation accidents are occurring during that phase of flight. Wow, that's a lot. As it says here, takeoffs are optional, but landings are mandatory, right? With that in mind, when it comes to landing, hard landings are not uncommon. Gusty winds, low-level turbulence, and crosswinds can cause issues. And porpoising, wheelbarrowing with a tricycle gear, and ground looping with a tailwheel aircraft all add up to what you see something like here. Of course, the fatal ones will involve a more significant loss of control, but the bottom line is that landings were a big contributor to aircraft accidents. The good news is that aircraft in the landing phase are slowing down, so fatalities are not as large on a percentage basis as takeoff accidents. Accidents during takeoff are the second most common, as you can see here in this slide. They account for roughly 25% of GA accidents. However, they do account for the largest percentage in terms of fatalities. It's not good. So during takeoff, aircraft are accelerating, and the farther they go into the takeoff process, the more significant the incident can be in terms of property damage, injury, and unfortunately, loss of life. Another important factor to take into consideration is that on takeoff, the aircraft readiness for that particular flight is somewhat unproven. For an en route or landing incident, the aircraft has already been flying for a period of time, reducing the likelihood of something mechanical that could or should have been caught during the walk-around, or something forgotten, like a fuel vent cover or gust lock not removed before flight. Failing to address issues such as weight and balance, sufficient and appropriate runway length and conditions, crosswinds are at the root of many takeoff accidents. And finally, you can make the decision to not go because of en route or destination weather, or your own physical or mental condition. Those items might not lead to a takeoff accident, but those decisions made on the ground before the flight can have an impact on the rest of the flight. Let's remember that there are no consequences to decisions made before the wheels leave the ground. The decision to leave the ground is the key decision. So in discussing takeoff accidents, many takeoff accidents could be prevented with better pre-flight thoughtfulness. Such things as mechanical faults, sufficient fuel quantity and integrity, ensuring no water or sediment in the fuel, and items that a careful walk around should spot, but if ignored or overlooked, can result in an aircraft joining the ranks of those on the accident chart. Readiness to take off? Well, maybe not. Another important factor to take into consideration is that on takeoff, the aircraft readiness for that particular flight, again, is, as we said earlier, somewhat unproven. And we know what happens after that. Once you're airborne, things are going to probably work out well. But if we get that fuel vent cover that we forgot about, it's kind of late when you're rolling down the runway. En route accidents count for only slightly less than 20% of the accidents. These involve things like collision into terrain, known as CFIT, controlled flight into terrain, mechanical failure, or fuel issues leading to a loss of power and resulting in either precautionary or forced landings. Air-to-air collisions are somewhat rare. We had one in Ottawa recently in the last little while, but they are very rare. Flight following where available and electronic devices like ABS-B can reduce this hazard enormously. However, prevention of en route accidents due to low flying or poor weather decisions are the responsibility of guess who? The PIC. Last but not least, accidents during approach account for slightly less than 10% of the total. The major contributing factor are the usual suspects: collision with terrain, sudden loss of power, or loss of control. Hey, did you notice what's missing in the TSB reports? When the TSB reports on an accident, depending on which level it is, their mandate is to investigate all the factors contributing to the event. They will carefully describe all the factors leading up to the event, weather, the physical scene, and things like that. Conditions of the aircraft, the pilot's license, training and experience, how the pilot spent his day prior to the crash, and perhaps hundreds of other details. But they will never assign blame. That's for Transport Canada and the insurance companies to sort out. So the conclusion of this is poor pilot decision making is rarely mentioned as a possible cause. Why do you suppose that is? We're going to continue on now, and we're going to talk about making smart choices, continuing the cycle of decision making and the chain of events. You should enter a continuous decision-making cycle, as we said earlier today. Take the knowledge and information you already have, combine it with the new information you're gathering as you fly, and actively decide how to proceed. Every flight is a progression of events: pre-flight planning, the walk-around inspection, startup and taxi, takeoff, climb out, cruise, descent, approach, landing, taxiing, shutdown, and parking. Remember, the flight's not over till you're back inside. Mishaps rarely occur because of only one misstep along the way. There is usually a series of things that led to the final result, and we call this the chain of events. And there it is. There's a chain of events. So let's take a quick look at what we mean by this chain of events. What are the links that got us from the start of the flight to the end of the flight, and hopefully a good flight, but sometimes, unfortunately, an accident as well? Very few, if any, accidents have a single cause, as we said a couple of times. In most cases, there's a chain of bad decisions and other problems that led to the incident or accident. Had any one of those links, like the load or traffic or the health of the individuals, been broken, the incident might never have occurred. And effective decision-making, the decisions that create those links, is a process that often starts days before the flight and doesn't end until the aircraft is stopped, hangared, or tied down. All right, so flight decisions. Scheduling. What are the time constraints for your schedule? Do you have the need to get there? Do you have the time that's needed to get there and get back? What about the weather? Are the conditions flyable at your departure airport, in the air, en route, and at your destination, now and when you get there, and maybe after that? Do your walk around. Did you complete a full and comprehensive walk around? Or, I've done this 1,000 times, and you did a quick lick and a quick walk, and you were on your way. Did you see anything that could have had a negative impact on the success and safety of your flight? What about runway selection? Have you taken into account all of the variables related to your runway selection? Will density altitude have an effect, positive or negative, on your takeoff and climb? Are the crosswinds at the airport of departure en route, and your destination within your limits, not just the airplanes, but your limits. Destination conditions. Are the forecast winds and weather satisfactory for your arrival time and perhaps after or before? Maybe you get early. Weight and balance. Are you within limits? Did you do a weight and balance? How much do your passengers weigh? Where are they seated? How much baggage is being carried and how is it placed and how well is it secured? Yourself. Are you feeling tired? How's your state of mind? Are you distracted? Are you ready? Are you maybe eager or maybe too eager? What about those hazardous we talked about just a few minutes ago? Any prescription medication that you're on, can it impair your judgment and reaction time? Quite a list, and this is just before you fly. The decisions you make about every one of these items have an important consequence that impact the overall safety of your flight. So we tend to categorize decisions into two broad groups. Those that in which the pilot has the luxury of time to take a choice from careful analysis, and these types of decisions were just reviewed. We also have decisions that require an immediate resolution. It's the first kind of decision that is the main focus of this seminar. What we want is to provide you with a handy rule of thumb or mental template with which to take and make smart, reliable decisions. If those decisions are made with a safe, predicted outcome, the chain of events that often leads to an incident will be reduced or hopefully eliminated altogether. Just a moment here, I just got to deal with a dog.
I think we all certainly have that delightful issue every now and then of a pup joining in because they would like to participate. So no worries there. As Peter's away, we're Christina and I are following along with all your fantastic feedback. So thanks very much for your questions and your commentary there.
Okay, I'm back, and we just want to say that you probably heard this expression before, that superior pilots use their superior judgment to avoid situations in which they'll have to use their superior skills. So statistics might suggest otherwise. There are low-time pilots who consistently make good decisions, and there are high-time pilots who sometimes have taken too much risk. Why do you think that is? Pre-flight planning is where it all begins, and sometimes the hardest decisions are the ones that you made on the ground. To go or not to go, that is the question. Peer pressure and get-home-itis can be introduced at this stage, and the pressure to push into marginal weather, choose between fuel and useful load, or get there before dock can be daunting tasks. Good decisions made during the walk-around are the easiest to make since there is, in general, no urgency. There is usually plenty of time to consider all reasonable options. Impulsive reactions and decisions can be avoided. Unfortunately, walk-arounds in the Canadian winter are sometimes quite brief, and important details are sometimes overlooked. Good decisions made during a thorough walk-around will almost certainly guarantee a good outcome in the air. On the other hand, the first link in the chain of events leading to a bad outcome may be caught or missed at this stage. The walk-around may allow for a leisure decision-making, but leisurely doesn't mean not serious. Remember that old saying that you often hear around the hangar on stormy days. Better to be on the ground wishing that you were in the air than in the air wishing that you were on the ground. When you're preparing to fly, and flying you will find that your decision-making process is ongoing. Has to be. It's a cycle. And that cycle has three elements as shown on the slide. Anticipation at the top, recognition, and then action. This decision-making loop, as depicted on the slide, is closed. It's not open. It's continuous, right? We gather information, we process the information, we make the decision, we act on the decision, and return to the gathering process. So it's continuous. We want to avoid the kind of things called poor situation awareness, so that you don't end up like these two gentlemen wondering why there's a mountain goat in the middle of a cloud. Regularly scan your engine instruments looking for any changes. Monitor your aircraft position relative to terrain and airspace. Actually listen when appropriate, where appropriate, to ATC and advisory frequencies. Keep a watch out for other traffic and weather changes. Use available tools like XM Weather and other things, and flight service stations en route to keep up to date on changes in the weather. Nothing wrong with 126.7 and listening to the nearest radio station like Quebec radio, or depending on where you are in Canada, London radio, etc. Out west, right? You've got a lot going on when you're flying, even in a simple aircraft on a nice VFR day. And when something changes, you need to take action. No matter what the challenges you face, remember that adage: aviate, navigate, communicate. Maintaining control of your aircraft is, and always is, your first priority, right? Okay, so anticipate the first one. What could go wrong? It's a good idea to maintain an active mental lookout for potential problems before and during flight, but also recognize that different phases of flight call for different degrees of anticipation. For example, think about the takeoff and initial climb to cruise. Have you actively considered the possibility of an engine failure on takeoff and thought about the required responses? In this case, you must recognize the problem immediately and be spring-loaded to the action position, right? You don't have time for leisurely decisions. On the other hand, an engine failure at altitude over open countryside affords you considerable time, maybe too much time, to troubleshoot and decide on the best options for a successful outcome. Weather or air traffic might create issues like holds or delays, passenger comfort, your airport arrival status, the en route weather, your airplane's mechanical condition, the fuel load, and your own physical and mental condition all should come to mind. With all these factors in mind throughout the flight, and that means from planning to finish, you want to consider and ask yourself, what could go wrong? And what actions would I take if something happened? We're not suggesting paranoia. No, not at all. What we're talking about is keeping an active mental awareness of potential problems before and during the flight. That's what we're talking about. Okay, recognize. Has something gone wrong? Avoid problems in flight by paying attention. Have you ever just been flying along and just kind of staring out the window, enjoying the view, and something happens? Maybe you didn't see it happen, right? Avoid problems by paying attention. The sooner you recognize a problem and start thinking about how to deal with it, the better. A little personal story, flying my family back several years ago on a twin from a nice Christmas vacation back from the Carolinas to back to Ontario. And I just happened to be glancing at the oil gauge on one of the two engines, and I saw the pressure gauge just bump and then start dropping. And I immediately caged the right engine, the correct engine, and because the engine went from normal oil pressure to zero oil pressure in about 5 seconds. Not the kind of thing you would see unless you happen to be looking at it right away. Diverted into a Pennsylvania airfield, and everything was fine. And luckily, there wasn't much damage done to the engine, but it was from recognizing that first symptom, right? A broken crankshaft is really obvious and will make itself known immediately. But smaller, more insidious problems can be difficult to detect if you're not paying attention to those engine gauges or other things like that. For example, deviations from the weather forecast can be quite subtle, and trouble with the aircraft, such as I just described, or worse, maybe a failing electrical system, can easily be overlooked. Where is that little red light in your airplane that tells you that the alternator has stopped working? Is it part of something that you can see readily, or is it tucked in a corner somewhere? The key is to stay alert and look for things that don't seem normal or don't fit with your expectations. Pay attention to anything that gives you cause to pause. These are the signals that the situation is changing, possibly for the worse, and that you may need to take action really, really soon to recognize things. Okay, options. At the risk of simplifying it maybe a little bit too much, the basic options available when a problem arises are as follows. Continue the flight as planned, paying very close attention to whatever is causing the problem. Continue the flight, deviating from the plan as necessary. And thirdly, getting the airplane on the ground as soon as practical. The more serious the problem, or the more limited your understanding of its seriousness, the more conservative the choices you need to take. And the more you should lean towards a precautionary landing, right? A timely choice provides many more alternatives. In a rapidly deteriorating situation, every passing minute robs you of options. Options that likely won't come back. Remember, the really tough decisions really don't normally sneak up on us. They arise because either we failed to recognize that problem soon enough, or failed to take action while there were still viable alternatives. You want to be in control of the situation, not having the situation in control of you. Because we need to act, right? Evaluate your options, as we said in the previous slide, and choose one. This is where many pilots fail. As you recognize potential issues and you act on them, keep safety top of mind. Some situations require time to consider options, while others, like an engine failure on takeoff, require a much faster action, something that's been drilled into you. And it's responding from muscle memory, as we call it. If something happens, you need to be able to react. In case of that engine failure on takeoff, should have already had a mental decision about what you would do before you push in the throttle and decided in the air. And rolling down the runway, go, no go, which we're going to talk about later. How many people are doing that? Keep in mind that the problem doesn't often work themselves out. Once you determine that there is an issue, you need to deal with it and take action. The airplane is rarely going to fix itself. In some extreme cases, that action to act might be a tough decision, like declaring an emergency, making an off-airport landing, or deploying, if you have it, an aircraft parachute. On an off-airport, precautionary landing is a valid option when things like weather go south. The bottom line is that you and your passengers will most likely walk away from a precautionary landing more readily than a thunderstorm-related structural failure or spin into the ground as a result of bad weather. What do we want to do? We want to fly the plane, okay? Fly the plane. Early recognition is important to keep your options open. Recognizing big problems like an engine failure is easy. Well, not easy to deal with necessarily, but easy to recognize. Train yourself to recognize the smaller things that might go unnoticed in a sentence. Learn to improve your situational awareness. If you recognize that the situation is cropping up, don't focus on it excessively or exclusively. Keep flying the airplane, aviate, navigate, communicate in that order, which is your primary focus, and work on the problem. The picture in front of you, you may be aware of, maybe not. Eastern Airlines L-1011, large commercial aircraft in 1972, preparing for a landing in Miami International. Aircraft brand new, 4 months old, new pilots. Not new to the airplane, or not new pilots, but perhaps a little new to the airplane. Anyway, there they were getting ready to land, and there was an issue with a landing gear indicator, a little light on the dash. The pilot had just under 30,000 hours and was accompanied by 2 other flight crew, a co-pilot and a flight engineer. Also on board, although not officially working but was assisting with the problem, was a flight technical officer. While the entire crew were troubleshooting the burnt out light bulb, no one noticed, including ATC, that the pilot, one of the 2 front seaters, and inadvertently bumped the control column hard enough to switch off the autopilot. And the aircraft was slowly but ever increasingly descending into the Everglades. It was, in the end, the largest air disaster in American history, killing 101 people on board, 75 people surviving. They estimate that at impact, the aircraft was traveling at almost 600 miles an hour and dug a hole meters deep in the Everglades. Keep in mind that you are not alone up there. Another airplane pilot might be on board to lend a hand or with you, and you're keeping watch for others, sharing the sky with you. Maintain a slightly pessimistic attitude and a healthy skepticism about the competence of others. There is an old proverb, trust but verify. Doing so will help keep us safe in the air. Okay, we talked about priorities, sorting them out, keeping them foremost, right? And what are they? The immediate ones, we just said a couple times, we'll say it again. Aviate, navigate, communicate, right? That's it. That's it in a nutshell. Large-scale priorities, surviving unharmed, saving the aircraft, and reaching your intended destination. So, whoops. Declaring an emergency is a hard decision, right? For most pilots, really hard, right? That ego thing starts to kick in. As part of our training, we are taught to deal with issues. After all, we are pilots. If you can, put your concerns about stigma and imagined after incident paperwork aside and declare that emergency and make a logical decision for those situations. It will provide you with the access to knowledgeable people who are there to help. Many will have additional information you may require, things like closer airports and radar vectors. Emergency resources will be made available, and you will receive priority handling and all the help you need. ATC has only one job, that's to keep you safe in any way that they can. About 5 years ago now, yours truly was conducting a twin-engine flight out of the Ottawa airport, and to make a long story short, I ended up having a double engine failure in a light twin where we ended up landing in a field about 10 miles, not quite 10 miles west of the Ottawa airport. As soon as I declared my first PAN and then a Mayday, I had the entire airspace was mine. ATC could not do enough for me. And it was very gratifying to have those folks right there ready to help me in any way possible. So don't be afraid, make the call and make it appropriate, not too late. So now we're going to talk a little bit about this thing called gambler's affliction. What is it and how does it apply to pilots? Well, let's define it clearly. The gambler's affliction has three key elements. The belief is that I won before, so I'll win again. The second belief is that the odds are in my favor. And we tend to underestimate the cost of losing. This also sometimes referred to as we call confirmation bias. When risky behavior does not result in an accident, it gets repeated. If you get away with pushing the limits, guess what? You might do it more often because there are no negative consequences. It might become the new normal, just like COVID has in many ways made a whole bunch of new normals. You keep doing stupid stuff because you got away with it. Humans are notoriously bad at estimating probability, and this affliction leads us into making very bad choices based on overconfidence or unjustified optimism. You know, I can climb through that cloud deck. There's probably only a little bit of ice in it. I've done that before, and I got nothing. So I can probably do it again. Not every cloud's the same. In addition to making poor choices on probability, the gambler's affliction also causes pilots to overestimate their personal minimums. Of course, there can be other factors than the gambler's affliction that pressure or misleading a pilot into making the poor decision. So it's worth understanding how humans make decisions. Psychological research has shown that when we make a decision, we tend to apply a mental template to determine the best choice. Sometimes the template is simply based on past experience. For example, things that glow are usually hot. So we decide to be careful before touching them. Your brain doesn't store images of every possible glowing object and then make the temperature association. Instead, it relies on the experience that something glowing once burned you and applies that association to the new situation. The question is there a template that can help pilots make good flying decisions? The answer is emphatically yes. All right, at this point, Sharon, let's take a little break before we hop into Pascal's wager. I just want to take a little pause here for the cause and get a little bit of water back into the system. And, give me 2 minutes.
And I encourage everybody here to also take a break. You might see a little bit of sun in my face. Apologies about that. But yeah, we're sitting here for 2.5 hours together. And I imagine throughout the pandemic, you're sitting around a lot too. So breathe in, breathe out, and make sure that your spine is all straightened while you're sitting. And go ahead and refill your coffee cups, and see you in a couple minutes. All right, I'm going to come back on. I see a few questions. So as some of you are just taking a quick break, I'll just spend a little time with you. Are the slides available post-seminar to attendees? Recordings as well as a short FAQ will compile a list of some of your most commonly asked questions into a document and share post-seminar on our members only page on the Copa website. What else is here? There's some really nice comments. Louise D has a comment of great educational tasks. Thank you. Hall Mayor says fantastic so far. Thank you. So I appreciate all the positive feedback. This is a new tool that we're using. I'm sure you've heard me mention that already. So any feedback you may have on your experience and what's working, we'll send out a survey post seminar to ask about that as well.
It's very gratifying to hear. We can get back if you wish, Sharon, and forge on. It's I trust that everybody, the volume and everything else is good. Everybody can hear me all right. I've not been blamed too often for being meek of voice, so I'll.
Yes, it is the opposite. You're coming in crystal clear for everybody, Peter. So great job so far with the content and your volume control. Go ahead.
Okay. So there, the whiteboard's off. So all right, we're back at it, folks. We're going to talk about something a little bit you might consider off topic. Blaise Pascal. You might ask who he is. He's a French mathematician, and he came up with this very interesting discussion back in the days when people were wondering about things like gravity. Isaac Newton was one of the flavors of the year, and his discussions about things. And Blaise Pascal came up with this thing called the Pascal's wager. And this is a model of a decision-making algorithm that can be applied to many situations where a pilot must make a critical decision. However, to use the algorithm effectively, you must have the template firmly in your mind at all times. You sometimes hear it paraphrased this way: it is always best to err on the side of caution. He had a slightly different way of looking at it. You should never think of it in those terms because it implies that making the best decision has the potential to be wrong, and that is blatantly false. The decision which guarantees a satisfactory outcome should never be the one made in error. Pascal's wager depends upon the following premise: that in an uncertain situation, a decision should never be based on the best or hoped for potential outcome, but should be based on the worst potential outcome. I'm just going to repeat that. The premise is as follows, that in an uncertain situation, a decision should never be taken or made based on the best hopeful potential outcome, but should be based on the worst potential outcome. In other words, a decision should never be made based on the best, but on the worst. In this case, and this is what we talk about with Pascal's wager. His belief was as in the slide. If you don't believe that God exists, best bet that he does by behaving morally and above reproach. If God exists, you go to heaven. If he doesn't, well, no harm was done. All worked out good. So what does that talk about aviation? We just said. So why does a long dead philosopher? Simple. Extending in his line of reasoning as an aviator, rationally consider the worst possible outcome that may result from your decisions. Plan for that outcome. Create scenarios for how you will deal with those outcomes. If things go well, you're laughing. No harm done. You would have been ready for that possible negative event if it happened and had a plan ready to go. So, by planning ahead, you'll have decisions ready to go if needed. If things go well, you don't need to use them. No harm done. Pascal, you're a rascally genius. All right, let's jump into our case studies. So we're going to see a couple of videos, about 5 in total, and there's 2 people that star in these, not exclusively. And we talk about Bob and Alice going flying. Alice has some weight and balance decisions. There are some landing decisions, 3 different situations dealing with crosswinds, an interesting intersection takeoff decision, and a night, fuel, and weight video towards the very end. So these templates, it's a very simple algorithm, Pascal's wager, and we're going to, one of the cool things about Pascal's wager is that even though it's called a wager, it takes the gambler's affliction out of the equation. Let's take a closer look at how all of this works. To fully understand why poor decisions are made, and you can guess we're talking about JFK Jr. and his plane crash off of Martha's Vineyard, even when there's a better choice is obvious, we need to first look at some of the psychological, physiological, and environmental conditions that affect the pilot's decision-making process. An analysis of incident reports and pilot interviews reveal a common theme: poor decisions that can often be traced back to personal difficulties. Time constraints and fatigue also produce conditions that pressure pilots into making poor decisions. It's important to note that the pilots don't usually acknowledge or perhaps even realize that they are making a decision under any kind of pressure. The pressure we're talking about here is very subtle, and it can often be associated with the pilot's personality. But by personality, we don't necessarily mean a pilot with a reckless or dangerous, hazardous, cavalier nature. It could also be the highly experienced pilot who plans flights carefully and methodically and confidently, and he or she heads out under somewhat risky circumstances with the "I've done this many times before and gotten away with it" attitude. This leads us to a concept psychologists call the gambler's affliction. This can, and often does, lead, unfortunately, pilots into bad decisions. So we talked about Blaise Pascal being that 17th century mathematician, and although he was a groundbreaking scientist, he came up with this logic versus faith issue. And he had a deeper question when he was asking us. And the question that he asked was, what were the hazards of not believing in God? Believe or not believe? And as we saw earlier today, a few moments ago, choosing the second option to not believe in God, and God does exist, well, the outcome in those days was meant an afterlife in hell. So in other words, a bad outcome. All right? So here we go. So here comes our first video on weather with Bob and Alice.
This is Bob, and this is Alice. They both have similar flying hours and experience. Alice and Bob are both planning a weekend getaway with friends, and what makes the trip so special is that they'll be flying to their destination. Because their friends don't have much experience flying, it'll be one of those trips in which getting there will be a lot of the fun. Alice is very enthusiastic. She discusses the plan with her friends and outlines the route, explaining that it's weather dependent and therefore subject to change. Expecting a very scenic flight, she tells her passengers to bring their cameras. She also instructs them to dress appropriately for the weather that they should expect en route. Bob is equally enthusiastic. He also tells his passengers to bring their cameras and dress appropriately for the expected weather, but focuses more on the flying fun and destination rather than be a downer and open the conversation about any possibility of change. A few days before the planned trip, both pilots check the weather. The aviation forecast indicates that things should be fine for the flight. However, a strong cold front is approaching, and that's predicted to change the weather significantly. But moving at its current speed, it's not expected to be a problem. Alice updates her friends a few days prior to their trip about the possibility of a change due to weather. She explains that it's much safer on the ground in unsuitable flying weather, and taking risks is not usually a pleasant flying experience for anybody. Bob checks the weather too, but thinks it will probably be fine. Not wanting to dampen anyone's enthusiasm or opinion of him, he doesn't mention the possibility of a postponement. Alice knows the route well, but nevertheless reviews and plans out the proposed flight. She has en route airports listed, noting runway headings, radio frequencies, and other relevant information in case she needs an alternate to her destination. Bob also knows the route quite well and feels comfortable collecting the relevant data as required from the air. On the day of the flight, Alice arranges to meet her friends well before their planned departure time. By arriving early, she has time to prepare the plane or even depart a little earlier than planned. After pre-flight, she has plenty of time to show her friends the charts, iPad, and GPS used to plot out the proposed route and keep them on track in the air. She reminds them that based on the latest weather information, a change in route or alternate plan might be required. Bob generally arrives at the airport about an hour before he flies, and this trip is no exception. He instructs his friends to do the same, not realizing that in getting his passengers organized, he'll be distracted and use up time he generally devotes to properly preparing for a flight. Bob is concerned that his friends will be disappointed or discouraged at the possibility of postponement, and he neglects to inform his passengers of a potential delay or change in the plan. He slightly exaggerates his confidence in completing the outing as planned to reduce causing his passengers any anxiety. Bob knows the weather might change, so he hurries to get airborne. En route, the weather starts to deteriorate more quickly than forecast. Both Alice and Bob have their own personal and identical VFR minimums. Both also have a conversation with flight service to get a weather update. The weather has deteriorated more quickly than forecast, but is predicted to hold throughout the flight right to the destination. But as it is forecast right now, it will be close to their personal minimums for the entire trip.
All right, let's get back to the slides. So that was Bob and Alice getting ready to do a little weather trip, and we could see that one was maybe a little bit more prepared than the other. The fact that hello there. Let me get back to the slides. Sorry about that, folks. Here we go. So the fact that you've had an accident-free flying career doesn't necessarily mean that your aeronautical decision-making skills are beyond reproach. In many cases, pilots get away with poor decisions that, under slightly different circumstances, would have resulted in an accident. And far too many pilots have drawn the wrong conclusions after getting away with it several times. Remember that it is not experience itself that's valuable. It's the lessons learned from that experience. And taking the wrong lesson from that experience, I got away with it before, could be worse than having no experience whatsoever. A fatal mistake can be made by anybody. Even high-time pilots sometimes fall prey to the errors of judgment as demonstrated by the accident summary below. In this case, after a cross-country flight, the single-engine airplane, piloted by a 40,000-hour pilot, impacted heavily wooded terrain about a quarter mile short of the runway, about a quarter mile short of the approach end of a municipal runway. Earlier in the day, the airplane had departed from a private strip with approximately 15 gallons of fuel on board. A person who was in the vicinity of the accident witnessed an airplane flying towards the airport about 100 feet above ground level, and the engine was not running. He observed the airplane flying over a tree line and disappearing behind it, but did not hear any kind of impact noise. No radio transmissions were heard from the accident aircraft. Examination of the aircraft and engine at the accident site did not reveal any mechanical pre-impact anomalies. According to the aircraft manufacturer's documentation, the total fuel capacity of the aircraft was 39 gallons, total in both tanks, of which 3 gallons were not usable, 1.5 gallons per tank. Guess how much fuel was found on board? The total fuel on board at the accident site was approximately 1.5 gallons. Total flight time from when the pilot last refueled the airplane with 15 gallons could not be determined. Probable cause? A loss of engine power due to the pilot's failure to refuel, resulting in fuel starvation. Contributing factors were the lack of suitable terrain for the forced landing and a shoulder harness restraint system that was not installed. Very sad. All right, we're going to jump to a weight and balance video now.
Alice has been asked to pick up her daughter and her 2 friends from a college town a few flight hours away. They are taking a long weekend away from school. The closest airport is not too far from the college. It has been unusually hot this spring, and the forecast for today is no exception. The airstrip Alice is to pick up her daughter and her friends from is a little grass strip and unfamiliar to her. Alice elects to do a precautionary approach and performs a low and over to inspect the field. She notes that the runway is in good shape, but there are trees at both ends of the field. She is also surprised at how quickly the airplane slowed during rollout on the grass strip. When Alice pulls up, her passengers are all ready to go. They have what you might expect them to have for a fun weekend away: all the clothes and personal items needed, plus their golf clubs. Alice eyes the luggage, and on first look, it appears to be reasonable to carry and properly stowed on board. But the golf clubs will add too much, and there is no safe way to store the long items like the clubs in the plane, so they have to be left behind. Alice is familiar with properly loading the aircraft based on the POH and has a cursory look at the bags the young women are bringing along. Most often, a pilot will need to estimate the weight of the cargo and passengers. Transport Canada recommends that a pilot add 4.5 kilograms or 10 pounds to any weight volunteered by a passenger. If a passenger won't share their weight, they recommend that the pilot take an educated guess. Although not the best method, sometimes guessing is all you can do. Transport has suggested seasonal weights for adults and children, but these estimates include typical airline carry-ons and clothing. But again, these were worked out for the airline use. Check out RAC Section 3 in the AIM. Generally speaking, having a scale handy is unlikely, but Alice knows a thing or two about college kids and has brought one along. This eliminates the guessing and helps in how to load the plane. She also knows her daughter's weight, and her daughter knows her pilot mom and provided the weights a few days prior to help with flight planning. Alice starts to load the plane, respecting the weight and balance limits, and even makes a point to load the heavier bags farther forward in the baggage compartment. Once the bags are loaded, Alice begins her pre-flight inspection by dipping the tanks to check her fuel level. After considering her passenger and baggage load, she decides to take on more fuel. Alice then continues her pre-flight inspection. After meticulously finishing her checks, Alice taxis out to the runway and is surprised by the amount of power she needs to use just to taxi with the airplane now close to gross. This is far different from what she's used to on asphalt. This might even be made worse from the ground being a little soft from previous days of rain. Alice backtracks as far as she can on the runway. She knows that the aircraft is within its weight and balance limits, but the grass is an unknown for her. Maybe it's just in her mind, but Alice notes that the trees at the end of the runway seem to appear a little taller than they did while they were loading the plane. Power in and the takeoff roll started. The acceleration is not quite what Alice has experienced on dry pavement, and it seems to be taking a long time for the airspeed to come to life. Alice knows the ground roll to clear a 50-foot obstacle on a paved runway, but there was no calculation for a grass runway. She is now faced with a choice. Continue the takeoff and risk the airplane climbing out just over the trees, or play it safe by aborting the takeoff and reducing the load, or perhaps waiting for cooler temperatures the next morning.
All right, so there we go. So there's a good video of a takeoff accident calculation, and just one thing about that video that we want to advise you all on. I'm sure some of the sharp-eyed folks there who are familiar with the airplane, in this case a Cessna 172M, would notice that there were no flaps deployed for the takeoff. And according to the M version of the POH, normal and obstacle clearance takeoff are performed with the wing flaps up. The use of 10 degrees of flaps will shorten the ground run approximately 10%. This advantage will be lost in the climb to a 50-foot obstacle. I think in this case with Alice there, she really had a tough call, and I think I probably would have done the abort. One of the things that we talk about doing a lot is the idea of having a go, no-go point. And if you're not in the air at the no-go point, then stop and abort the takeoff. All right, a disproportionate number of accidents, as we said earlier, occur on the landing phase, as this slide reminds us. Quite often, pilots become too focused on the commitment to land, when they should really be considering a go-around. And Transport Canada has talked a lot about, and we certainly are proponents of the stable approach idea. Approaches that begin badly can end badly. Accidents occur when pilots become too focused on getting down at all costs. Although the go-around is often the pilot's best choice to save an approach that has been suboptimal or not going the way it should have, pilots choose to try and save the bad approach, sometimes with very disastrous results. However, keeping Pascal's wager in mind and planning for the worst while hoping for the best is usually the best approach of all. In other words, plan to go around from the beginning, and you will not be disappointed or surprised by an approach that needs a save. If everything else goes well, it's a bonus. We're going to take a look at 3 scenarios back to back to back where something may have gone badly. And what we'd like you to do is put yourself in the pilot's seat for all of these. First one's called touchdown off center line. Second one is touchdown too high. And the third one is called touchdown bounce. There'll be a fourth one after that called intersection takeoff. Here we go.
There are many reasons that even a well-planned approach can go awry. One of them is rapidly changing and variable wind conditions. They can create alignment problems on approach and during and after touchdown. Winds around obstacles on the ground can cause vertical wind shears in which pilots will unexpectedly find themselves too high or too low. Finally, unexpected gusts can launch an aircraft into the air after touchdown. You are approaching an airport to land on a runway in which there is a gusty left-hand crosswind. It is well within your aircraft's and your own personal capabilities, but enough of a factor that you have placed yourself on alert in preparation for the landing. You are perfectly positioned into your downwind, and you get your pre-landing checklist accomplished early so you won't be distracted with it later into the landing phase. Your base turn is picture perfect, and reducing power, you set up for a descent towards your turn onto final. With the gusty crosswind you can expect on the ground, you decide to leave your flaps retracted to ensure maximum control without creating too much lift in the wings that the crosswind can get under. Unfortunately, you miss the timing on the turn to final, and with the tailwind you are currently experiencing on base, are pushed quite a bit to the right of the extended centerline of the runway. To get back onto the final approach, you must make a turn to the left and start your bank back. 10 degrees is not enough, and you have set your maximum angle of bank at this low altitude to 20 degrees. A coordinated 20-degree bank still is not enough to get you back to final on time, so you employ Pascal's wager. This time your turn to final is perfect and you start your approach, but it quickly becomes apparent that you are too high based on your distance from the runway. You have a few choices. The first is to continue your approach, but steepen it to lose height more quickly. Unfortunately, with the increased speed in the descent, you will still land long on the runway. The second choice is to lower your flaps. That will increase your rate of descent without increasing your speed over the ground and get you to the runway threshold. However, with the gusty crosswind, you can expect reduced aileron effectiveness against the crosswind with the flaps down, and also with the reduced stall speed that the flaps create, you will be more susceptible to upset or skipping sideways by the crosswind. So you employ Pascal's wager. Your approach is perfect. You are aligned on the extended centerline, and your height and glide path will land you perfectly just beyond the marked threshold of the runway. Preparing for the gusty left-hand crosswind, you note obstructions around the approach end of the runway and prepare for any dirty air that can cause wind shear, which could change your glide angle. You have already decided that there might be some and have the throttle ready. Although this is a muscle memory type of action, your decision to be prepared in advance will equip you with the awareness and power to deal with it. Managing through the dirty air, you prepare to put your left wing down, arrest your descent, and gently flare. When you pass by the hangar, the wind abates and you feel the bottom fall out. Early on this landing, you had made a decision that this might happen, and if it did, and you found yourself challenged this close to the runway, you had already decided that you would go around. Your decision-making is about to come into play because with the abatement of the wind, your aircraft descended faster than expected, you hit your mains hard and bounced. There still is lots of runway left, and you could catch it with power and try again. But your nose is high, you have passed the hangar that shielded the wind, and with it, the left crosswind has picked up again. You made the decision to go, and that is just what you do.
All right, we're just going to talk about what we just saw in those last few videos. So a touchdown off center line and too high and bounce. In all these three cases, we see whoops, hang on a second, I didn't hit the start button. Sorry about that. So in all these three cases, we see where Pascal's wager, plan for the worst and hope for the best, would be good principles, keeping the go-around in mind in all three situations, whether it be touching down too high or too far down the runway, bouncing, or in the case of the first one, just not being set up properly. And all the times when people didn't do this right is where we end up with porpoising, prop strikes, running off the side of the runway, and things like that. So these are obviously not ideal situations and one that we want to avoid. The last video that we're going to play now is called the intersection takeoff, and the scenario is on a short runway on a hot day. So here we go. All right.
Sometimes a set of circumstances comes together that conspire to test a pilot's resolve to stick to his personal minimums. Bob has been attending an out-of-town sales meeting which interrupted his summer vacation. Our pilot is happy it's over and things are about to get back on track. It's a hot summer day when Bob gets to the airport. He begins his flight home with a trip to the airplane, which is parked on the ramp. The first order of business is to order fuel and load his product samples in the plane. Luckily, they are in a variety of small cartons and cases so they can be distributed between the back seat and the baggage area. Bob then heads into the air-conditioned comfort of the FBO to get the weather and plan his trip home. It's a blazing 39 degrees Celsius outside, with high humidity and broken cumulus with bases at 8,000 feet. In spite of this, the VFR outlook all the way home is pretty good. Visibility is somewhat restricted by haze. He needs full tanks to make the trip with an hour's reserve, which meets Bob's personal cross-country minimums, and his heavy samples bring the plane, a Cessna 172M, to a few pounds below gross. Bob isn't worried by this. Old Reliable is a decent hauler, and there is plenty of runway at both ends of the trip. Bob files a VFR flight plan with departure scheduled in 45 minutes. He stops at the counter to pay his bill and heads out to pre-flight the airplane. Man, it's hot out here, Bob thinks to himself. It would be good to get up to a cooler 6,500 feet. Although there will be a moderate tailwind for the ride home, Bob notes that the air is dead still here on the ground. Seating himself in the plane, Bob notes that it's a steam bath inside. It will be a good thing to get the fan up front going and to get up to the cooler air at altitude as soon as possible. After startup, Bob listens to the ATIS. This airport has two parallel runways, 06, 24 left and right, and a shorter cross runway. But the ATIS indicates the shorter GA runways are both under maintenance and unavailable. Bob calls ground control for taxi to the active. He expects runway 24 right is favored because of terrain to the east of the airport, but is surprised to be informed that 24 right has just been closed at taxi Mike. A Piper that just landed is blocking the runway with a flat tire. A delay up to 35 minutes is anticipated. Bob checks the airport diagram and he notes that there appears to be about 1,800 feet of runway available on 24 right from the intersection of Taxi Echo. He thinks this shouldn't be a problem. He has operated 172 out of 1,800 feet in the past, so he requests and is granted an intersection takeoff. However, as he taxis off the ramp to Taxi Echo, a few things begin to nag at Bob's mind. The plane is heavy, the day is unbearably hot, and the engine has 2,400 hours on it. At the last annual, cylinders 3 and 4 both had compression readings just below 70. Upon arriving at the intersection, Bob takes a look down the available runway. Somehow it seems much shorter than he expected. He calls the tower and announces he's ready to go at the intersection. A check of the performance data in the POH would have been a good idea, but that's not possible now. Bob gets his clearance to take off. He starts to roll, but is disturbed to discover that acceleration is sluggish.
All right, so Bob made a big boo-boo, didn't he? Hot days require more runway to get airborne, and climb performance can also be degraded. And sounds to me, at least in this scenario, like not a whole lot of calculation was done beforehand. So if we play and roll the dice, we won't necessarily get the outcome we're expecting. All right. So we're going to move on to personal minimums. And really what we just saw in those 4 videos were people who may have did a good job with personal minimums, and in other cases, not so much. The process of developing personal minimums is valuable in itself. It requires you to think about the most critical decision you're likely to be called upon to make, but it lets you set decision parameters long before you find yourself in that critical situation. There's a great deal of value in simply thinking about particular situations and visualizing your responses before they happen, and then allowing yourself to set personal minimums, not only the basic limit. They get you in the ballpark. In the real world, you will probably need to do some fine-tuning. Your final decisions should take into account the unique factors that exist on a particular flight, such as Bob on his very hot day. Regulations are in place for a good reason. They provide legal minimums for a variety of flight-related issues and are a very good starting point. But they are the bare legal minimums, and every pilot in the room has different knowledge level experiences, and maybe their limits need to be a little higher or tighter than what are in the regs. AOPA has got a beautiful Air Safety Institute sheet like the one in this picture that will allow you to develop your own personal minimums and your own set of regulations based on you. And if you honestly and consistently stay within those minimums, then there's a really good chance that you're going to make good and safe decisions, because those minimums were created at a time just like this, when you're comfortable, not stressed out like you might be during a difficult flight, like the guy turning on final in the Crosswind, or just having bumped or bounced his airplane. And having these minimums beforehand are way better than making them up as you're going along. Write these minimums down and stick to them. Reevaluate them from time to time as your experience changes, but do that on the ground after careful consideration. And a bit of a note on next month's seminar, not to get too far off track. The reality is, I think a lot of us right now, those minimums that we set maybe 2 years ago would need to consider the fact that we haven't necessarily done much, if any, flying in the last year. So creating those personal minimums when you just need to get there or in the middle of a crisis is certainly not the appropriate time for doing this. When you look at our aircraft, we ought to ask ourselves, think about the minimums for your recency with a particular aircraft. For your minimums, have a minimum number of hours in the same make and model within a previous time frame. How about maybe 5 hours in the last 6 months? Seems reasonable. Currency versus recency. It's an interesting concept. Recency, Transport Canada regs talk about recency. 6 takeoff and landings in the last period of time and things like that. Currency, you will qualify for recency with the seminar, not this one because we're not doing it in Transport Canada. But when was the last time you had some dual instruction or a supervised review of your flying? How long has it been since you've flown at all? Where are we in our currency? How many landings have you done in the last 3 months or in the last 30 days? All very important questions. So when we talk about minimums, personal minimums, one of the things we want to talk about is weather. How low will you go? Legal is one thing, but are you prepared to fly down to legal minimums, whether they be VFR, special VFR, or if you're an IFR pilot, flying it down to the approach minimums of that airport? 301, 200.5. 501, whatever it is. What are the legal minimums for uncontrolled airspace? Well, if you're below 1,000 feet in daytime, you need a minimum of 2 miles flight visibility, and you have to be clear of cloud. Over 1,000 feet in the air, And you must remain at least 2,000 feet horizontally from cloud, 500 feet vertically, but only 1 mile visibility. 1 mile. Okay, that's not very far. 1,600 meters. How does that stack up against your personal minimums? Are you in unfamiliar territory? You know, this map depicts someplace in the province of British Columbia, right? There's all sorts of symbology there. That's the Fraser River in the, let me just get this whiteboard going here for a second. That's the Fraser River down here on this side of the screen, right? We've got this diamond route. That might be unfamiliar to you. Hopefully, you're not discovering or needing to find that out when you're flying through BC. So when it comes to ceilings, we need to remember a few things. If you're cruising with 2 miles visibility low over the ground, and your aircraft has a cruising speed of 120 miles per hour, that means you are passing over the ground 2 miles in a minute, which means with 2 minutes flight visibility, you've got 60 seconds. That's all you've got. Pretty fast to keep concentrating on your flying, scan your engine gauges, and look for obstructions like towers in that 60 seconds. And the second issue about ceilings is that it's not just clearance over obstacles. It's also the factor that provides you with the time to deal with an emergency. If one of those in the unlikely events things happens, how fast can you find and prepare for emergency landing from under 1,000 feet above ground? Wow. Yeah, it's a good question. Did we think about it before we went flying? What about your personal limits for crosswinds? You might have a manufacturer's number, might be a Cessna 172 with a demonstrated crosswind capability of 15 knots, but what's yours? When was the last time you landed with 15 knots of crosswind at 90 degrees with flaps down? How did your manufacturer even get those numbers? Was it an actual limit or was it just a demonstration of capability? Can the carded crosswind winds be exceeded? Would you? And how do your personal minimums stack up against those in your POH? A lot of it has to do with recency and currency, right? Is there another runway that's more into wind? Maybe it's time to take it. Fuel minimums. Legal versus prudent. As we all know in Canada, for an aeroplane, we only need 30 minutes of fuel. If you're flying something like a Cessna 150 or a Cessna 172, that 30 minutes may only be 2-4 gallons total on board as a minimum, plus, of course, the unusable fuel, right? And so what are your personal minimums? We saw earlier in the video today where somebody was talking about having an hour. Okay, sure, that's better. You know, what's prudent? How far are the airports that you could land on in this route that you're going on if it's cross country, right? And by the way, there is no minimums for ultralight aircraft. Maybe your limits need to be higher than the legal limits for fuel. We're going to go with a fuel management video now, which I think is it's really a good thought provoker. Let's watch it through to the end and really get something out of this one.
It's been a great weekend. 48 hours of rest and relaxation at a friend's mountain cabin. Now it's time for you and your 3 friends to pile into the airplane and head home. The 2,500-foot runway is pretty marginal for a loaded Cessna on a warm fall afternoon. But you've run the numbers, and with half tanks, it shouldn't be a problem. There's one little issue though. Although you're legal, you're not as keen about night flying as you used to be, especially cross-country. Normally you could have made it in daylight, but the days are getting shorter now and your passengers were slow getting ready. A fuel stop en route will probably mean some night flying to get home, and that makes you pretty uneasy. Then again, so does the thought of telling your friends you can't get them home as promised. As expected, the takeoff and climb are sluggish, and halfway home, the winds aloft aren't favorable. You'll have about 30 minutes of fuel on board when you land. Your last potential fuel stop is only a few minutes ahead, but it's a short runway surrounded by higher terrain. So, how will you balance your fuel situation with aircraft performance and the fact that the sun's going down fast? You've passed up your last refueling spot. Unfortunately, as you press on, the winds aloft seem to be picking up. Your heart sinks as you calculate a 10-minute reserve at your destination. Assuming your math's correct, your fuel gauges are accurate, and the winds don't change. The fuel stop you bypassed is now exactly the same distance as your destination, but turning around would give you a tailwind.
Sorry guys, but we have a little problem. I'm going to have to turn back and land at another airport.
With the wind working in your favor now, you made good time getting back to the airport you'd passed up earlier. As you taxi up to the FBO, with both fuel gauges pegged on empty, you decided you had quite enough excitement for one evening and arrange a rental car.
After I shut down the engine, I realized that my hands were shaking. If I decided to keep going, there's no question in my mind we wouldn't have made it. After some poor choices, one good decision saved the day, but I really dodged the bullet there. Come on, only 20 miles to go. No. Oh, okay, everybody, I want you to tighten up your seatbelts, be quiet, and listen to me. We're going to have to make an off-airport landing. Mayday, Mayday, Mayday. Cessna Golf Charlie Mike Quebec, Cessna Golf Charlie Mike Quebec, Cessna Golf Charlie Mike Quebec. I've lost my engine. I'm going to try to land in a field 6 miles west of Gananoque. Don't know what I was thinking. Deep down, I knew I was going to have a fuel problem, but somehow I just couldn't get myself to do anything about it. Too many missed opportunities and bad decisions. So glad we all walked away from that landing. I don't know how I'd live with myself otherwise.
Even though it meant a night landing back home, you couldn't pass up your last chance to get fuel. With so little performance margin out of the short, obstructed runway, you decide to add only 5 gallons. It's a good thing you stopped, though, because the headwind just keeps increasing. Even with the extra fuel, you'll only have 30 minutes left on landing.
Kingston Radio, Cessna Golf Charlie Mike Quebec, 10 miles east, inbound Kingston, full stop.
Charlie Mike Quebec, Kingston Radio, report 5 miles east. Expect to join the right downwind for runway 01. Traffic will be a Cessna on the left downwind and a Bonanza 8 miles west on the RNAV approach 01. Bonanza Foxtrot Alpha Zulu, report K-Pod inbound.
Great. Figures I'd get here at rush hour. Kingston Radio, Cessna Golf Charlie Mike Quebec, 5 miles east.
Cessna Charlie Mike Quebec, roger. You'll be following the Cessna on the left downwind.
Oh no. Well, it should still have it. Well, the engine's still running, just rough is all. Maybe it's just carb ice. Kingston Radio, Charlie Mike Quebec, right downwind, and I have the traffic. Jeez, what's that guy's deal? That's the most strung out pattern I've ever seen.
Cessna Charlie Mike Quebec, cleared to land runway 01.
Kingston, Charlie Mike Quebec, my engine just quit. I'm pretty far out here. I don't think I can make it back to the runway.
Cessna Charlie Mike Quebec, roger. Clear to land any runway. Winds 340 at 5 and we'll get the emergency equipment out there. If able, say persons on board.
4 on board, Charlie Mike Quebec. Oh, come on, too fast. Get to the best glide. Nope, not gonna make it. Okay, everybody, brace yourselves.
Fuel exhaustion led to a landing short at the airport. There was damage to the aircraft and minor injuries to the pilot and passengers. During the interview, the pilot indicated he should have stopped and added sufficient fuel to arrive at the destination with adequate reserves and should have notified ATC of his fuel status. A review of his logbook showed a lack of recent night flying experience.
Kingston Radio, Cessna Golf, Charlie Mike Quebec, minimum fuel.
Cessna Charlie Mike Quebec, understand minimum fuel.
Radio, Charlie Mike Quebec, I just lost my engine. I'm going direct to 25.
Cessna Charlie Mike Quebec, roger. Cleared to land any runway. Winds 240 at 5 and we'll get the emergency equipment out there. If able, say persons on board.
There's 4 aboard, Cessna Charlie Mike Quebec.
Cessna Charlie Mike Quebec, if able, left turn at the next intersection. We'll send a tug out there to pull you to the ramp.
That was a day I'll just as soon forget. But you know, in any other way, I hope I never do. I should have declared an emergency rather than just minimum fuel, but it didn't make much difference at that point anyway. I'd already made some pretty poor decisions and let things get way out of hand. I feel bad about putting us in a situation like that. I've got to declare an emergency. They'll want to know how much fuel I've got. Kingston Radio, Cessna Golf Charlie Mike Quebec, declaring an emergency. I'm low on fuel. I've only got a few minutes left.
Cessna Charlie Mike Quebec, roger. Cleared to land any runway. Winds Cessna Charlie Mike at 5.
Okay, we lost a little bit of the sync on the video there. We're just going to go back to the slides. That's actually a really good presentation on fuel management, and really I think is a thought-provoking one as far as, you know, doing it right the first time rather than doing it wrong the first time, because what we want to do is make the right decision on the first case and not the wrong decision, and then getting caught up with get-homeitis and really putting yourself under a lot of stress and a lot of pressure to get home when a better decision made earlier would have made all the difference in the day for that situation that was depicted in the video. So anyway, we're talking now about ourselves. We want to evaluate our personal airworthiness. And that can be a difficult and a demanding task. I'm sure we've all seen and hopefully used the I'm Safe checklist, because we want to ask ourselves, really, am I safe? Each letter represents one of the 6 important factors affecting our ability to fly safely and engage in effective decision-making. If you find yourself deficient in any of these areas, your decision-making ability may be compromised, and then we need to take a serious no-go decision about ourselves. Here we go. Illness. Any form of illness can affect our ability to safely operate the aircraft. That same illness can be the same thing that affects our ability to deal with the noises and the vibration and the harshness that's all part of being in that airplane, right? Sinuses blockages caused by head cold can result in severe vertigo, and self-medication might not be the ticket either. So we want to really make sure that we're fit to fly. On the heels of illness is medication. Pilots are often tempted to use OTCs, over-the-counter remedies, to mask the effects of an illness such as a cold. These remedies may have side effects that aren't necessarily that we're aware of or on the box. And anytime that you're going to medicate, you want to tell a person who's prescribing something to you that you are a pilot and that you are actively flying. Stress, it comes in many forms. It can alter our decision-making ability. And remember that the psychological stresses of work, school, family, and our personal life are carried with you into the cockpit and can degrade your performance immeasurably. Physical stress, such as being too hot, too cold, moist, and etc., can all take their toll on decision-making. Hard work and the resulting soreness and fatigue can also compromise against you as well. You know, how much snow did you shovel this week? How physically fit do you feel that you are before you go flying? Alcohol. All pilots should know better than to mix alcohol with flying. We know about the 12-hour bottle to throttle rule. Used to be the 8-hour. That's a bare minimum, right? And a lot of drinks may require a longer recovery period. Remember, too, that many cold remedies may use alcohol as one of the active ingredients in the medicine. So be certain not to use these before flying. It's really difficult to think clearly and rationally when you're tired, overtired. Maybe you're falling asleep in the cockpit. Mental abilities such as motor coordination can be severely compromised when a pilot's tired. If you don't have the adequate rest, don't fly. Eating. Nutrition is the last part of the I'm Safe checklist, and it's probably the most important because if we haven't been well fed and well hydrated, our mental processes are going to be deficient. And you need to have fuel in your system, and that fuel is food to have your body perform at its best. So as we talked a few slides ago, about developing your own personal minimums, write them down. Once you've developed them, write them down and keep them with you. Don't leave it at home. Use it as a guide or a template every time you go. And from time to time, reassess those minimums during periods of either greater activity or lesser activity, like a lot of us have been experiencing, that the minimums might change, might need to be raised a little higher. Become more proficient and as you transition to a different airplane or even just the one that you're used to. And as you age, which we're all doing, you also might want to revise your personal minimums, but let's leave that for another seminar. When you're flying or going to fly, keep the full picture in mind. That keeps you and all of your personal minimums in mind and compared to the conditions you're about to face. If several things are close to your minimums, you may want to stay on the ground. Remember, these things are cumulative, right? It's not just the weather, it's not just the airport, it's the combination of everything. If one item is just slightly below minimums, it may be okay. But if you need a backup plan, in this case, things might not work out for you. When you're preparing to fly and flying, you will need to find that your decision-making process is continually ongoing. Remember, we talked about the cycle: anticipation, recognition, and action. So in summary, Transport Canada inspectors, when examining new pilot candidates, aren't only looking for stick and rudder skills. They are also considering the new pilot's ability to make decisions, right? In fact, the biggest part of that flight test is the decision-making, and a lot of that is demonstrated before they even get in the cockpit to go and see how their stick and rudder skills are. If they're being properly assessed and they're being checked to see how they think about their decision-making. It's a never-ending process. With time and experience, your ability to properly assess your situations will improve and act on the situations as you see it. Remember Pascal's wager. If he were here today, he would probably advise pilots to err on the side of caution, and that's really good advice. Folks, this ends the presentation for part one. We're going to take, I believe it's a pause. I think I'm going to turn it back over to Sharon and get ready for the next deck. Thank you.
Sure, and of course you're all sitting here, you spending your weekend with us, so I am going to offer you your afternoon Reminder to just stretch it out and go ahead and get a quick coffee or refill or do whatever you need. We'll start back promptly in, what is it? It's 1:45 p.m. Eastern time right now. So we'll give it we'll give it 5 minutes. We are running a little behind, so we'll come back promptly and start at 1:50 p.m.
Sounds good. Thanks, Sharon.
And for those who are just sticking around, I'm going to post it in the chat section here. I'll do that right now. I'm looking to build some Spotify playlists for you to use while you're flying, to enjoy as we're taking breaks for this seminar, for these seminars as well. So if you have any suggestions for songs that you love listening to, some playlist ideas, whether it's spring flying or mountain flying or whatever it may be, we welcome all suggestions. Part 2, just a quick question there from Kevin Brown. It's regarding icing. So we'll be starting at 1:50 p.m. Eastern time there, and seeing some more really positive feedback here. So thanks for that great comment there, Grant Arnold, on doing a great job. Thank you. I have to come back on there from Salvador Romero, a very strongly positioned Metallica. So we'll look into that for the playlist. Herman Heon, forgive me if I mispronounced your last name there. First time I attend a presentation on decision making, so well done. Thanks very much. We'll pass that on to Peter when he returns. Let's see here. Kenneth Pothier, please pass on to our good friend Peter. Greetings from Nova Scotia, from Ken Pothier and Verna Worth. We certainly will do that. Mark Dube or Dubé, haha, my favorite tune is ATC Flight Following. Great job. I'm going to have a lot of fun putting together these playlists. If you're not a country fan, I apologize ahead of time. I am. So they will be littered with that. But I have very diverse music tastes, I promise. So they'll be wide ranging. Okay, Murray Detler, excellent webinar and great job all. Thanks very much, Murray. I might hear that you're back, Peter.
Yes, I was gonna just chime in there for a second. I know I caught a second of the chat when somebody was asking about my what I call my toboggan ride in Ottawa there about 5 years ago. This time of year, it was just after a big snow, funny like we had this week, and I had a twin engine failure in the Duchess. And somebody asked what happened. Basically, it was a fuel issue. We had ice in the fuel. It was so cold, it was minus 30. And the ice in the fuel limited some of the flow into the engine. So one engine quit completely. The other engine wouldn't produce enough power to maintain powered flight. So we went for a toboggan ride in the farm outside, just off of south of Hunt Club in west of Woodruff. And yeah, it was quite an interesting day.
It sounds like it, Peter. And just going back to the song suggestions here, it sounds like some people are on the fence. Maybe this is a divisive topic. Of some people do not listen to music while they're flying, others do. I saw some suggestions for ABBA. I am a big fan. That will be on there. Peter, earlier you may not have been around, but there was a lot of friends saying hi to you. So
Oh, cool. I didn't. I wasn't too busy to look at the chat, but I appreciate the kind comments and the community that we're part of. It's a great community.
fantastic. Okay, I am seeing from Martin Boss. I heard conflicting information. Does the seminar count towards TC's pilot recurrency requirements? It does not. It is on the registration page, as well as if you go visit our website, it very clearly notes which seminars do count
That's right.
towards the pilot recurrence training program, towards that program. It is March, June, September,
and Christmas.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. I'm ready to go. If we want, I can kick the slide presentation back into overdrive, and we'll start part 2.
Wonderful. Thanks, Peter.
All right, folks. So let's get back at it. We're into part 2. We're getting ready for the spring flying. C'est préparé pour le printemps. And we know the theory is that spring, which is just about a month away, is when warmer temperatures arrive, and it means that, amongst other things, that there are more risks of airframe and engine icing as that dry Arctic air, the polar vortex, becomes warmer and wetter. And we thank Robert Japp for this cool picture taken from a camera placed on the tailplane of his Cessna, I think it's a 172. In this seminar this afternoon, a lot shorter than the first one, but still the content is there. We're going to try and make ourselves a little more weather-wise. We should realize or remember that, you know, Canada has 4 very distinct seasons, and spring is definitely one of them. And we see during springtime a transition, weather patterns in transition. Springtime versus winter, we know that generally speaking across this country, spring means warmer and wetter with more atmospheric moisture, which also means more clouds and reduced visibility and precipitation coming from those clouds. Also, more frontal activity, right? If you think about what especially the folks in the prairies experienced over the last couple of weeks, most of February, the polar vortex, basically a great big high pressure sitting over and invading most of Canada right down to Texas last week with severe cold air, one big high pressure area. As that jet stream moves north and the polar vortex retreats and shrinks, the frontal systems speed up and become more a part of what we see in Canada. And that, of course, brings more chances of both airframe and engine carb icing. And we're going to focus more on the carb icing than on airframe icing in particular today. One of the references, if you haven't looked at this book in a while, I strongly recommend it for bedtime reading. Or, you know, if you want to read stories to yourself before you go to bed, it's a great reference. And the Air Command Weather Manual, now called the RCAF Weather Manual, but it's basically the same book. So these 2 pictures on the next 2 slides were taken from this book. And this is not a great picture, but what it shows is percentages of ceilings of less than 1,003. And if you look at, and this is wintertime, and if you look at, I'm just going to put the whiteboard on here for a second. And if you look at sort of this area of Canada, guess where that is? That's the Arctic. That's our polar vortex sitting up there. And as a result, we've got lots of cold air pushing down to the south, cold, clear air, pushing all that warm air out of the way. As a result, we see that the percentages of 100,003, basically VFR versus IFR, are very low unless you get down near the lakes in this area. And this is that classic winter weather situation like we saw last week. And then as we move into springtime and we see summer weather, we see just the opposite. Now the polar vortex, and I'll turn the whiteboard back on for a second. Now the polar vortex is sitting up here, much smaller, not nearly as present. We have a jet stream that's going sort of from southwest to northeast. And as a result of that, we see in Canada areas that were fairly low percentages of 1003 are now up in the 20 and 30% range in the James Bay area, and down here on the East Coast with lots of moisture moving up from south to north, lots of moist air, lots of coastal weather in the Atlantic region and things like that. So a significant change from what we saw in the wintertime to what we see in the summertime. And in between that, of course, is spring. Another look at it from overhead, if we looking down from over the North Pole, we can see this in December, this very fast-moving, very aggressive jet stream that's well in southern states. And then in the summertime, that polar system has pretty much died off completely in a much weaker jet stream system. So what we get in the springtime is we get these rapid fluctuations as patterns shift with the changes that are short-term but also violent as well. As we said, in the wintertime, our jet stream is strong but closer to the tropics, and the cold air dominates over us. In the summertime, those jet streams weaken, but they also get closer, and warmth and moisture, thank God, return, right? We also get much more effective heating by the sun. We get more moisture drawn from the surface because the surface temperatures are higher, and as a result, in spring, this air warms and can also carry more moisture, which means that we're going to create more clouds and more ice. In springtime, we see this dramatic shift. And this picture on this slide was taken from last year. It was one of the worst days that the Kentucky area had in quite a while. And in one day, over a 24-hour period, a total of 9 twisters, very violent storms in parts of Kentucky. And you can see there EF 1, 2, 3, and 4, and all sorts of touchdowns of these violent storms. It's not just an American problem. Le Canada peut également être durement touché par cette transition d'hiver au printemps. So this picture is from Halifax 6 years ago in March. And suffice to say, they got dumped on, right? And we get these things called weather bombs that happen a lot during the spring systems when these weather shifts happen. The same thing can happen in the fall, but we're talking about spring flying. So Canada can get hard by these. They roll up the East Coast, and sometimes it hits Ontario. Sometimes they come off the West Coast and hit BC with snow like they had about a week ago out there. I'm sure people in Victoria and Vancouver were wondering what was coming next, maybe the end of the world. So let's agree that spring weather shouldn't be messed with because it can be turn quickly and be very violent in the process. So when we're getting ready to fly, we need to think about a bunch of things in the springtime, right? Air temperature versus dew point. Relative humidities are climbing. The air is moister. Therefore, the difference between what they used to call the dry bulb and the wet bulb thermometers, it is diminishing. And that difference means that the air mass is changing and their characteristics are changing. Surface temps are a lot closer to freezing, which means that our parked aircraft may frost over or ice up more readily. Temperatures aloft are now warmer. That freezing level, which we probably looked at all winter long on our GFAs, there was no freezing level because it was at the surface, right? Now the freezing levels are aloft, which means that we are going to have an above freezing layer that we may end up climbing into a below freezing layer. If the air is dry, that's fine. If the air is not dry at that transition, we potentially have problems with clouds, moisture, which may also be icing, right? We have surface winds that are strengthening and may provide a crosswind component that we might not have been dealing with. Those winds aloft, whether they be air mass winds or frontal winds, are going to have zones where turbulence is more significant. We're also going to see something we haven't seen since last summer, and that's the return of diurnal heating from that heat of the sun, the longer days, warming the air, causing air to rise, and having those vertical currents leading to air mass turbulence. And if you're a glider pilot, hurrah, right? We now can all those lifties that we want to have to get us, keep us aloft for longer. But it can also bring with it a lot of moisture and cloud producing from that same vertical currents. One of the things that we enjoyed during the winter, which starts to diminish and was talked about in a couple of the presentations we saw in part 1, is the whole aspect of aircraft performance planning. As we transition to spring, our weight and balance considerations need to be reweighed and reconsidered. Winter kits, those big bulky wing covers and airplane covers and windshield covers, let's get rid of them. We don't need them. We don't need to carry around stuff that's not valid right now. Winter kits and covers not required. So now the aircraft probably has a lesser weight, empty, than it did before. What about survival kits? Maybe they need to be changed as well. This all means that we could be ending up with more room to carry fuel, or more passengers, or more cargo. And those passengers may actually weigh less because they're not carrying all that winter kit with them. The AIM gives us winter and summer values for adult males and females, and we should use those as guides if we don't know the accurate weights of our passengers. As it says, add 10% to whatever you're offered as a weight, because people are probably a little bit humble on what they're actually weighing. We get to spring performance planning, we're looking at differences in density altitude. Your aircraft manufacturer charts, if you're from an aircraft made in the States, probably never indicated a temperature below 0, right? Cessna, Piper, Beechcraft tend to have charts that stop at 0. Well, when it's minus 20, so fantastic. We've got better than manufacturer performance. Those temperatures are going away. Our density altitudes are going up. They're not negative now, they're positive. What does that mean for us? It means that lift is less effective. Thrust from our propellers is less in abundance. And as a result, our runway lengths for takeoff and landing are going to increase. And that's fine if you've got lots of runway, and if it's a bare and dry runway, okay. But maybe it's not bare and dry. Maybe you fly off a grass strip. How wet is your grass? How muddy is your gravel or dirt runway? What's the drainage like? Did it rain overnight? Did it snow? Did the snow melt? Has all that snow that you had on the side of the runway now melted onto the runway or near the runway? Is there puddling or pooling on the runway? These are all things that are going to affect takeoff and landing distances and braking ability when we are braking for landing, or maybe we have to abort a takeoff. So spring changes a lot of things, and we need to change with them. Runway friction indexes may change dramatically, especially when things become wet, and we don't have runway friction indexes for grass or gravel. So the winter frozen hard gravel runway is now maybe loose gravel and a very different kettle of fish as far as providing us with braking ability. So let's not forget to consider our aircraft performance when we are getting ready to go flying. So spring flying, there it is. There's that picture. There we are. The sun is bright, the flowers are blooming, and we just want to go flying. But are we ready for flight? Is our aircraft ready? Is this the first flight in a while? And I'm not even talking COVID. It could be in a long while. Have we been locked down since December 26th, perhaps? So, how rusty are we? What about your maps? Are you using an electronic flight book like Garmin Pilot or ForeFlight or Flight Plan Go or one of those other things? Is it up to date? Is your subscription up to date? What about those charts? If you're still using paper charts, which you could probably very well be using, are they current? When was the last issue? Check with the map people and see if your VNC from 2015, which if it is, it's definitely out of date, right? Definitely out of date. And there's a ton of information on that chart that changes, and that's why new maps are put out now almost every year. So if your paper chart, whether it's a VTA or a VNC, is more than a year old, it's out of date. Go get a new one. Get a hold of one of the online providers or go into a map store and get new maps and look at it. Just don't put it in your flight bag. Look at it. Your route, is it prepared? Have you followed the flight plan? Are you doing it electronically, right? Are you and your crew ready to go? I know you can't wait to go, but are you ready to go? We just talked about I'm safe. Let's ask ourselves, are we safe to go fly? Right? And some of the stuff we just touched on, but it's worth touching on again. That walk around, it's a critical component of our pre-flight process, right? It's a visual confirmation of the aircraft's readiness. Are the wings and surfaces clean? Have you been flying off a runway that maybe had standing water on it? Is there mud or water and debris all up down the underside of the aircraft? What about our brakes? Are they clear and free? If there's moisture there, is that moisture, is it just water or is it an oil, right? So wings and surfaces, are they clean? We're talking about, also free from contamination because, did the aircraft frost over last night? Is all that gone? Does it need to go in a hangar? Is the sun going to melt it? All that's important, right? Getting it started in early spring is just like winter. We had a great presentation from Tanis. Some of that stuff on preheating was fantastic. Great information, right? Priming for the first start. How's that battery doing? Where was my airplane parked? Did I plug it in? Did it come out of a hangar? How ready is that airplane? That lead acid battery. When was the last time it was charged? As the temperatures get warmer, sure, it gets easier, right? But if it's that first start in a while, it could be a challenge. So again, being prepared for the start is really just as important right now as it was for that winter start. You might have more chances, but they're not infinite, okay? Oil pressure within 30 seconds. It's an age-old expression, but do we have oil pressure? What about the oil temperature, especially if we're not preheating, right? And do we want to run the risk of a full power takeoff with cold oil? Might not be a good idea, right? Our run-up, still critical, right? It gives us hints about the health of the engine, right? How's that doing? How is it? Is this airplane ready to go flying? As we said in the last presentation, the critical thing is now we're going to take this airplane flying. We don't know. We can do a lot of calculations and we can do a lot of expectation, but that first full application of throttle, how is that engine responding, right? We should be prepared, as Mr. Blaze said, the wager, plan for the worst, hope for the best, right? Be prepared. Okay, takeoff and cruise. If it's not bare and dry, then beware, right? If you're not using a go, no go plan, please start doing one. Pick a spot reasonably down the runway where if you're not airborne by that spot, you've got room to stop. And if you're at that spot and you're not airborne, then stop. There's a good reason for it. It's called safety and being able to stop when things aren't going well. Because otherwise, all you're doing is you're painting yourself into a corner that you don't want to get out of or can't get out of. If you're in cruising flight and the aloft temperatures are between +5 and -5, then you're at a very high risk of carburetor icing. Even if you don't have, if you've got a fuel injection system, there are still risks to the engine at those temperatures. Are your engine oil temperatures and pressures still in the green? If you're a person who's a single weight oil user, and they're still out there, is that winter weight oil now a little too thin? It could be that as the temperatures rise, and if you haven't flown much, that winter weight oil needs to be changed out either for a multi-weight oil, for an all-season oil, or a summer oil at a higher viscosity. When we think about precipitation, clouds, and visibility, as we said, between that +5 and -5 degrees Celsius, we're in the high risk zone. And we should treat any precipitation in that area as an icing highly possible, highly potential. Let's not forget, springtime is also time for the return of things like towering cumulus and CBs, and they can form quickly in springtime air. That air is ready to rock and roll. It's ready to bubble up like popcorn, and those little tiny cumulus clouds become towering cumulus, become CBs, and yeah, they may only be topping out in the high teens to the low 20s, but they can still deliver quite a kick and throw things at you like snow, ice, hail, and just rain that at +2 or +3 is still going to make a very big mess of your aircraft. IFR flight brings the same added risks because now you're in cloud, and what do we really know about that cloud rain? How close to icing is it? All right, we're going to just change gears a little bit because what we want to do for the next few slides for the rest of this presentation is talk about a special event that happened a couple of years ago near Smithers in May of 2019 when, unfortunately, a Cessna 182 with 4 souls on board crashed, and one of the 4 people survived and 3 unfortunately did not. In synopsis, in overview, this aircraft, after nearly 2 hours of flight, had an engine power drop off. The pilot elected to divert to a nearby airport, which was 2.5 miles away. But as we'll see, where he actually ended up going was nowhere near the airport. He ended up heading the wrong way, crash landing. 1 survivor, not the pilot. The 406 ELT did work as advertised and was also augmented by other tracking devices. Was experienced an issue? Well, not really. The pilot had over 46,000 hours, and 73 hours were on this aircraft. And he averaged about 150 hours a year. So, no, experience wasn't an issue. Not really. All right, so here it is in big picture. So if we start up, if you look at the timeline, so right here, 822, I'll just turn the whiteboard on for a second. So the flight starts here and ends up going around like this, and eventually to a crash site over here. So that's how it all went down, so to speak. And in that time frame from 8:22 to 8:35, so over about 13 minutes, the pilot eventually, after orbiting for a bit, started descending in this area here, declared a mayday, and about 2 minutes later, crash landed over here. At about 8:22 in this area of the flight here, carb ice made its presence known. These are all data points from radar. And let me go back to the slide. There we go. Okay. All right, so what happened? Almost a 300 horsepower carburetor engine with carb heat, but no other carb temperature aids to let the pilot know what was happening in the engine or in the carburetor throat of that engine. No carb air temp gauge, no air temperature probe to identify icing conditions outside the aircraft or in the throat of the carburetor. This aircraft also had a history of carb airbox repairs. In fact, this engine that was in the airplane was a supplementary type certificated engine fully done properly, installed properly. But the aircraft had a history of carb airbox repairs. The weather reports of the day included scattered clouds at the same height as the flight operations, with rain showers recorded near the aircraft in flight. The outside air temperatures was recorded as plus 7 degrees C, and the TSB safety board deduced that there was a partial power loss and that the cart heat was never in the hot position, or certainly was not in the hot position at landing. It was in the cold position. And the carb heat system had been modified to basically make it weaker than what it was originally designed to be, but that was within the acceptable range of the STC. So just to drag us back here for a second to something that some of us probably haven't seen in quite a while, is a carburetor icing chart, okay? So you can see there's basically 4 zones. There's serious icing at any power. There's moderate icing at cruise power, which is also serious icing at descent power. There's serious icing at descent power, and then there's light icing at cruiser descent power. And basically you've got rings here. So this kind of yellowy ring out here is basically saying that if the temperature example is minus 20 or minus 10, and the outside air temperature is also about the same, minus 10, the intersection of those 2 points puts you about here, right? Light icing, cruiser descent power. But if you are, say, plus 10, and an air temperature of plus 10, guess where you are? You're probably in cloud, but you're also in serious icing at any power setting. Now, at the intersection of air temperature and dew, we see the fact that the engine would be experiencing carb icing. So there's 2 boxes here. At 8 o'clock in the morning, which was just before the flight, the temperature was plus 6.5 with a dew point of minus 0.7. So if we take plus 6.5 and we go over, we're up in this area, so plus 6.5 right in here, right? We're on the edge of serious icing. At
Peter,
9
we can't see your mouse, just so you know. So if those who are following along, they may not see.
Okay, yeah. So there's a critical point right here where the 2 intersections are, and I'll just take that whiteboard off just so you can see it. That's where I'm trying to draw people's attention to. But if you see where the 2 black lines intersect, that's what we're talking about, where we've got -1 temperature and plus 6.7. And so the pilot, although, maybe thought that, the temperatures were okay, he was up in this area here. He was thinking, yeah, I'm okay, but no, really, because of the dew point, he's really over in here. And that's the tragic issue with this. So some of the aftermath of this situation was that in 2 recent accidents in the US, there were indications of carburetor icing on similar aircraft with the same engine modification. In fact, signaling that these aircraft may be more susceptible to the accumulation of carburetor icing than the original. In the area of the accident, the temperature and humidity in the area of the flight were conducive to serious carburetor icing at any engine power setting. Unfortunately, the pilot had no way to tell that he was at risk because he had nothing in his cockpit to tell him what the carburetor air temperature was, and so might have been rather blithely ignorant to it. His experience with carburetors didn't trigger an adequate and timely response to initial indications. A slight drop in manifold pressure, but no change in power, in RPM. One of the interesting things about this aircraft is that it was a constant speed propeller design, as opposed to a lot of light aircraft flown by GA pilots with a fixed pitch propeller. And we know that in a fixed pitch propeller engine, any indication of carburetor icing tends to show up as a drop in RPM, and that tends to be the trigger that we're all used to looking at. Unfortunately, with constant speed engines, that slight drop in manifold pressure is a much subtler indication. And a propeller RPM drop does not manifest itself until the engine is severely affected by carburetor icing. And typically, at that point, it's too late. So what did we see from this very sad case? We saw that spring flying is different from winter flying. That may be, like, duh, yes, of course it is. But are we prepared for the differences? We need to adjust our perception of weather volatility versus weather being benign in the wintertime. Aircraft performance is changing as temperatures and humidity rise. Essentially, as our density altitude climbs, as our air temperature and our air humidity increase, aircraft performance is decreasing, right? We must be very mindful of temperatures not only on the ground, but also temperatures and humidity while we are aloft, right? When was the last time we checked that air temperature gauge that's stuck in the airflow system of our aircraft? How accurate is it? Do we ever measure it? Have we ever actually seen that it's really telling us the big picture? Installing an air temperature probe or a carb ice system or a carb air temperature system is not an expensive thing, and maybe it's something really to consider. For those of you who are flying constant speed propeller aircraft, are you really aware and have you really practiced and are you really up on the symptoms that you're going to see in your airplane versus the carb ice symptoms that you're going to see in a fixed pitch airplane? We probably all trained on an aircraft that had a fixed pitch propeller. And our instructors, if they were good instructors, probably beat into you, not literally, figuratively, of course, that little drop in RPM was that first sign of carb icing. And to put that carb heat hot and leave it hot until you were sure that the icing situation was gone. But when we went to a constant speed aircraft, did we modify that learning? Did we learn for the new airplane? Chances are, maybe not. And the gentleman that was flying this aircraft, unfortunately, that didn't survive the accident, was flying both fixed pitch and constant speed aircraft, right? So he, on a regular basis, would have to adjust what he was looking at, right? So, and was he doing, as it suggested in the second last point, was he doing engine and preventative carb icing checks? Perhaps not. Remember, this situation developed after 2 hours of flying, right? So it was long in coming, subtly, and it just snuck up on him. And basically, when the indications of propeller RPM dropping off, it was unfortunately probably too late. Probably too late. So just go back to that slide. I'm going to go back to that chart, this chart here. This is a chart that we really need to respect a lot more than we may be doing and really understand, and I'm just going to go whiteboard here for a second, really understand what this serious icing part of the graph means. It means that if your air temperature, right, this line here, is intersecting with a dew point in this area, you're in trouble, right? You've got to be super vigilant. You've got to be extra aware. And like Pascal, like we talked about the decision-making process, you've got to be planning for the worst and hoping for the best. You want to be doing all kinds of carburetor icing checks that didn't matter when it was minus 10 and minus 10. If you go back here, again, I'll just go whiteboard again. Dew point minus 10, air temperature minus 10. No worries. light icing, cruiser, descent power only, right? So this is the big, this is one of the biggest issues and one of the key points about what we want to get reinforced today is this carb icing threat that comes on the heels of winter flying in springtime and to a certain extent also during fall flying. And I think that, yeah. So that's it. We'll take questions now, and I don't know if you know who this is. It's a picture of Chuck Yeager with an F-86 Sabre back from a long time ago, and he was one of. I was very fortunate to meet this gentleman in Los Angeles in the late '80s, and although he was a much older gentleman than the guy in this picture, he still had that glimmer in his eye of that steely-eyed jet fighter pilot. Very cool guy.
Thanks very much, Peter. We are coming to a close. We're very close to the close of today's seminar for 2:30 p.m. Eastern Time. So before we get into any questions, and we'll have enough time for one or two, I just wanted to provide an announcement. So we did look into, Gary, I'm sorry, unfortunately you weren't able to make today's seminar. So that $50 coupon instead is going to go to the next closest member who had first signed up. And started with us from the very beginning, all the way through as much as possible. So Stephen Sonin, congratulations. You won a $50 coupon to our Copa store. And yeah, congratulations. So I'm going to go ahead and just ask a couple questions for those who are still with us. Thank you very much for sticking it out, spending time with us over the weekend and learning about or having some reminders around aviation safety, as well as perhaps some new considerations overall. Okay, so, the questions are coming in. Let's see here. Let's go to, there was a really good question. I'm a bit confused by the point about card icing and fuel injected complex prop.
Okay.
I think we might need a little bit more context there. It's moving a little too fast. I'm just going to go on this screen here.
Yeah, okay, I can probably talk that. So in any aircraft that has a constant speed propeller, the indication of carburetor icing is going to be indicated by a drop in manifold pressure. The initial indication, which is the critical one, will be a drop in manifold pressure, not a drop in propeller RPM, because that initial loss of performance is not enough to cause the engine to lose its ability to maintain the RPM. When the engine power drops off more precipitously, more significantly, then you'll get a power loss and a propeller RPM loss. At that point, unfortunately, it may be too late. So the initial reaction to that manifold pressure drop should be two things: put on alternate air if you're fuel injected, also increase your throttle, and confirm that you've restored the manifold pressure.
Okay.
So that's, if that's your situation when you're fuel injected.
We have another question from Michael Capelli. What type of issues can you encounter with fuel injection systems?
As far as icing goes?
I believe so.
Your fuel injection systems are a little bit less prone, but the issue that you have with fuel injection systems, depending on how cold it is, we're talking about spring flying, so I won't talk about winter flying. But basically, you still have an impact icing your alternate air system. Your air intake could, in in a snow or ice or rain situation, be compromised and have a what they call a ram air loss, or an air intake being blocked by snow, ice, or other things like that. So it might be, you might get that certification, but the fuel injection system itself is a much more robust system as far as the whole idea of carburetor icing or air inlet icing goes.
Okay. Sebastian Stan asked, regarding airframe icing, are there any other conditions that can cause airframe icing Apart from precipitation and flying through cloud, is it possible to accumulate any icing in clear weather?
It would be very unusual if you did. I mean, you've got to have obviously precipitation. You have to have some accretion, some formation of water molecules on the aircraft. So if the air is literally bone dry or cloud free, it would be very unlikely that you would be accreting or picking up ice.
Okay. I'm going to go back to Sylvie Beaulieu. What carburetor temperature would you like to keep to prevent icing? Would you use to keep to prevent icing?
You've got to get yourself at least above +5. So, yeah, and this is in some aircraft systems, and I'm thinking more in light trainers, that in really cold weather, and I'm talking -20 to -25, those kind of temperatures, putting carb heat on can actually bring the engine into an area of carb icing. So you want to get the engine air above that +10 to +15 range if you can, because what that should do is prevent in the venturi, in the air part of the throttle, where the air mass is going to be decreasing in pressure and temperature, because that's what happens in the venturi, getting at above +10 to +15, getting above that temperature or higher will prevent ice formation in the carb throat in the venturi, and that's what we're talking about when we talk about carburetor icing.
It's a very thorough answer. Just a comment here from Raik Salim. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. Please dedicate more future seminars exclusively for weather phenomena, understanding general weather, decoding charts and forecasts. Thank you for yet another informative presentation. So that's great.
Sure.
That's great feedback for us.
Love the weather. Read that Aviation, read that RCAF weather manual. It's a fantastic book. It's got lots of information on it.
And I'm just going to have one last question going back to the PDM presentation. Both Fred Valiant and Ed Corsil had asked what was the cause of the double engine failure on the light twin out of Ottawa?
Yeah, I talked about that briefly. Basically, it was an interesting problem with, it was fuel related. There was some carburation issues, but we also had an icing issue in the fuel. The air was there was literally ice crystals in the fuel. It was cold enough that the ice was actually had fallen. There was no ice in the sump. There was no water in the sump, but when they actually checked the fuel tanks, there was actually ice crystals in the fuel. And so we had a little bit of restricted flow, but the other one was that both engines would not produce power. So when I lost the first engine, we just shut it down because, you've got two, right? Nobody has a double engine failure except me, right? And when we lost the second engine, we were already on our way back to the airport, and it did not fail completely, but it would not produce sufficient engine power to keep us in the air. So we were forced to make essentially a forced landing, a dead stick landing in the experimental farm just west of the airport. And it was gear up and no problems, just a toboggan.
Peter, I hate to put you on the spot. There's a lot of good momentum in here, so maybe we can just answer a couple more questions and then we'll wrap things up.
Sure.
I know that there's a lot of interest around weather, so quick one, Daniel Douillard, just confirming carb ice can occur cloud-free?
Well, yes, it can, but it's a very rare phenomenon to form at that, because you have to have moisture in the air. If there is no cloud, you could have near high relative humidity, so 85%, and that moisture in the air, although it's not in a cloud, could, when it gets into your engine and goes into the carburetor, could arrive at a state where it is now 100% humidity and then create the ice. So yes, you can have it when there's no cloud. Yes, you can have it.
Alrighty, Dan Tonner, isn't the danger range for carb icing anywhere between -5 Celsius to +15 Celsius ambient temp in combination with -5 to +15 dew point?
I think that's what the chart says. Yes, that is the range, but there's a significant range closer to the -5 and +5. That's where the biggest risk is.
Okay, last one here, Raik Salim again. Is there any harm in leaving the carb heat on for long periods of time, and how does that work in tandem with leaning at high altitudes as well?
Well, carb heat definitely does enrich in the mixture, and depending on, if you're intending to run with carb heat on for reasons which we won't get into right now, you should probably also be leaning the mixture as well. So you're still getting a lean and not an overly rich mixture, because that overly rich mixture is going to lead to all sorts of other problems: plug fouling, carbon fouling, potentially down the road, if it was to be left on long enough, creating carbon deposits, which could lead to other run-on issues and pre-ignition issues and things like that. So, for an extended period of time, maybe half an hour while you get through an area that is fairly high humidity, leaving it on is way better than having carburetor icing, but it's not something that you want to do without good cause.
Okay, fantastic. Well, I hope today's seminar was useful to you. From all the questions and comments we've received, I suspect it was so. I definitely let's provide a round of digital applause to Peter for the excellent walkthrough, as well to yourselves for being here with us today. So thank you very much for spending that time with us and participating in this program. I know that these times can be very isolating, so having an ability to connect with others is, of course, great. A reminder that I will be sending out a survey in a few days, just looking for any tips or any feedback that you can provide to help us improve this program. We are looking to solicit as much of your feedback as possible, and the recording will be made available again, so look out for that email. Thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your weekend, everybody. Take care.
Yeah, all the best to everyone.